The bullet missed Captain Sarah Navarro's head by 3 inches, close enough that she felt the heat, close enough that her ancestors whispered warnings in a language she'd never learned to speak. She pressed her spine against sun-baked concrete, the abandoned border station offering protection that wouldn't last another 5 minutes, maybe less. 8 rounds left in her M4 carbine, 8 pieces of copper-jacketed lead between her and whatever comes after this life. The math was simple, brutal, the kind of arithmetic that made men pray to gods they'd stopped believing in decades ago. 52 hostiles circling her position. She'd counted muzzle flashes, tracked movement patterns through the heat shimmer rising from Sonoran dirt. Professional soldiers, not cartel kids with gold-plated AKs and delusions of immortality. These men moved like her, thought like her, killed like her. They'd been trained by someone who knew how Delta Force operators think. Her radio crackled with static. Then Colonel James Brennan's voice cut through, sharp as broken glass. "Ghost, this is Hawk Actual. You are ordered to abort mission and extract immediately. Acknowledge." Sarah touched her throat mic, tasted copper and dust. Blood from somewhere. Hers or someone else's. Didn't matter now. "Negative, Hawk, mission incomplete." A pause, long enough that she heard automatic weapons fire in the distance. Webb or Chen, maybe both, maybe neither. The desert swallowed sounds and men with equal indifference. "Captain, I'm not asking. That's a direct order from your commanding officer." "Respectfully, sir." She reloaded her last magazine, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. "Go to hell." She cut the transmission and closed her eyes, letting the darkness behind her eyelids show her something her father had taught her 20 years ago. Before the uniform, before the missions, before everything turned to ash and secrets. "If you're going to die, ma'am," Michael Navarro had said, "die moving forward." Sarah opened her eyes, checked her weapon, and prepared to show these bastards what the last good men had taught their daughters. But first, she needed to remember how she'd gotten here. How a routine extraction in Arizona had turned into a bloodbath that would either make her a hero or a cautionary tale they'd whisper about in Fort Bragg briefing rooms for the next 50 years. The story started 96 hours earlier, before she knew her father was a ghost, before she understood that some men survive death by becoming something worse than dead. It started with a lie wrapped in an American flag. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, 0400 hours on a Tuesday that felt like every other Tuesday in a career built on Tuesdays. The kind of morning where coffee tasted like duty and the sunrise promised nothing but another day of controlled violence in distant places. Sarah ran the obstacle course in 32-degree darkness, her breath forming clouds that dispersed like tactical plans in the face of enemy contact. Sergeant Major Ray Kowalski kept pace beside her, his 58-year-old frame moving with the fluid economy of a man who'd learned to conserve energy in jungles and mountains across 4 decades of American foreign policy. Ray had been her father's best friend, had stood at the funeral 15 years ago, face carved from granite, eyes dry as desert stones. Had taken Sarah aside after they'd lowered an empty casket into Carolina clay and said words she still heard in her nightmares. "Your old man died doing the right thing. Remember that when people tell you otherwise." She'd been 19, angry, lost. He'd been the only one who hadn't treated her like a victim or a charity case. He'd treated her like a soldier's daughter, which meant he'd treated her like a soldier. Now they ran together through pre-dawn cold, 2 people bound by grief and the particular kind of love that military families mistake for normal. "You fight like your old man, Ghost," Ray said, using her call sign. Sarah Navarro had earned it during her second deployment to Iraq, a night operation in Mosul where she'd appeared behind enemy lines like smoke, eliminated 6 insurgents, and vanished before anyone realized Americans had been there. The name stuck. Ghost, a woman who walked through walls and left only bodies as proof she'd existed. "He taught me everything I know," Sarah replied, vaulting over a wall. "Not everything." Ray hit the ground beside her, smooth as water. "Some things you learned on your own, the dangerous things." They finished the run in silence, the kind shared by people who'd seen enough death to understand that words were just sounds men made to pretend they weren't alone in the dark. The team room at Delta Force headquarters smelled like gun oil and brotherhood. Sarah arrived first, always did, a habit drilled into her by father who'd believed punctuality was tactical advantage. She made coffee, strong enough to strip paint, the way operators liked it, because weak coffee meant weak discipline, and weak discipline got people killed. Master Sergeant David Henley arrived second, carrying the easy confidence of a medic who'd performed surgery in ditches while mortars fell. Doc set his kit down carefully, started his own ritual of checking supplies even though he'd checked them the night before and would check them again before mission. "Morning, Cap," Doc said, pouring coffee into a mug that read, "World's okayest combat medic." His wife had given it to him as joke. He carried it everywhere like talisman. "Sleep okay?" "Define okay." "More than 3 hours, less than 6 nightmares." "Then no." Doc laughed, that easy sound that made him popular with younger operators who needed someone to talk to when memories got loud at 3 a.m. "Same, had the dream about Fallujah again, the one with the kid and the IED. You know the one." Sarah knew. They all had their Fallujah, their Mosul, their Kabul. The moments when training met reality, and reality proved messier than doctrine suggested. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb arrived third, already cleaning his M4, despite having cleaned it the night before. Webb had relationship with weapons that bordered on romantic. He could field strip any firearm in darkness, reassemble it blindfolded, and discuss its ballistic properties with enthusiasm that made normal people uncomfortable. "Did you know," Webb announced to no one in particular, "that the effective range of M4 with M855A1 ammunition is technically 500 meters, but practical engagement distance in urban environments drops to 300 due to structural interference and human reaction time variables?" "Good morning to you too, Marcus," Doc said. "It's relevant. We're doing briefing today. Probably another urban operation. Statistics show 73% of Delta Force missions since 2015 have been urban environment. Knowing your effective engagement distances could save your life." "You're a walking TM," Sarah said, referring to technical manuals that made weapons boring instead of deadly. "Someone has to read them. Rest of you just point and shoot and hope physics agrees with your tactics." Staff Sergeant Tommy Chen entered next, young and brilliant, second-generation American whose parents had fled China looking for freedom and found son who joined Special Forces to defend it. Chen had Princeton engineering degree he'd never used except to calculate explosive yields and structural weak points. "Morning," Chen said, heading straight for coffee. "We doing brief today?" 800 hours, Sarah confirmed. Colonel Brennan himself. Must be important. Or classified, or both, usually both with him. Sergeant First Class Luis Ortega arrived last, moving quiet as thought, carrying sniper rifle he treated with reverence that bordered on religious. Ortega spoke rarely, shot accurately, and made younger operators nervous through sheer competence and economy of motion. He nodded to Sarah, poured coffee, sat in corner where he could see both doors and window. Sniper habits died hard. Ortega had spent so many hours studying sight pictures and wind calculations that he viewed world through scope even when rifle was locked in armory. Ray entered, and room unconsciously straightened. Not quite attention, but close. Sergeant Major commanded respect through 40 years of surviving things that killed better men. He looked at his team, face revealing nothing, and Sarah saw something flicker in his eyes that she'd remember later when everything fell apart. "Brief in 20, Ray said. "Full kit. This one's real world, not training exercise." After Ray left, Doc turned to Sarah. "He seems tense, more than usual." "Ray's always tense. It's his natural state." "No, this is different, and I've known him 15 years. Something's bothering him." Webb looked up from his rifle. "Maybe it's the op. Real world means real consequences. People die in real world." "People die in training too," Chen pointed out. "Remember selection? We lost 2 candidates to hypothermia and 1 to drowning. That's different. Selection is controlled risk. Real world is chaos pretending to follow plans." They talked while preparing gear. The easy banter of men who trained together so long they operated as single organism. Sarah listened, cataloging voices and patterns, memorizing this moment because some instinct whispered that things were about to change in ways she couldn't predict. The briefing room at 0800 hours was cold despite North Carolina's summer. Air conditioning set to meat locker temperatures because military logic said cool heads thought better. Sarah sat front row, her team flanking her, Ray standing to the side like guardian or judge depending on perspective. Colonel James Brennan entered carrying tablet and expression that meant classified and complicated. 52 years old, face carved by combat and command, eyes that had watched operations succeed and fail in equal measure. He commanded Delta Force with quiet authority that made loud commanders look weak by comparison. "Gentlemen," Brennan began, acknowledging Sarah with nod. "Captain." Screens illuminated, showing satellite imagery of desert that looked like every desert Sarah had operated in. Tan and brown and hostile, geography that swallowed armies throughout history. 72 hours ago, Dr. Robert Hutchins was taken from DEA safe house in Tucson, Arizona. Brennan pulled up photograph of thin man, 60-something, scared eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Hutchins is chemist, analyzes cartel drug operations for the agency. He's also last surviving witness to classified operation called Ghost Protocol. Sarah felt something cold move through her chest. Ghost, her call sign. Coincidence probably, but coincidences made her nervous. Ghost Protocol, Brennan continued, voice flat as winter sky, was counterinsurgency operation run 15 years ago. Details remain sealed, but Hutchins has evidence of systematic weapons trafficking from U.S. military arsenals to cartel organizations along the border. Names, dates, shipping manifests, evidence that could implicate currently serving officers at high levels. Webb raised his hand. How high? High enough that people want Hutchins silenced, permanently. High enough that this briefing is compartmented and you will not discuss it outside this room. Who has him now? Sarah kept her voice professional, but something about this felt wrong. 15 years ago, same year her father died. Sinaloa cartel, we think, or someone using their infrastructure. Intelligence indicates he's being held at abandoned mining town in Sonoran Desert, 15 miles inside Arizona. Place called Fantasma Verde. The name landed like grenade. Fantasma Verde. Green ghost. Sarah's Spanish was functional enough to translate, and suddenly her call sign felt less like coincidence and more like message she couldn't decode. Ray shifted position behind her, movement so small only she noticed, because she'd been trained by him to notice everything. The mission, Brennan said, pulling up tactical maps, is to extract Hutchins alive and secure whatever evidence he's carrying. 6-man team, Halo insertion at 2,300 hours tonight. Estimated hostile count 15 to 20. Standard cartel security, nothing your training can't handle. Rules of engagement? Doc asked. Weapons free once hostile intent is established. But Hutchins comes out alive. That's the priority. Questions? Sarah raised her hand, feeling weight of room's attention shift to her. Sir, Fantasma Verde. That's where my father conducted his last operation. Silence descended like snow. Even air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Brennan's face revealed nothing, which revealed everything. Coincidence, Captain. The desert's full of ghosts. Don't go looking for yours. But Sarah was already looking, had been looking for 15 years, through every deployment, every mission, every 3 a.m. moment when she wondered if her father had really died a hero or something else. With respect, sir, seems like significant coincidence. Same location, same time frame, operation involving weapons trafficking that my father might have been investigating. Your father's operation was classified. This operation is classified. The overlap is geographical, not operational. Do you have concerns that would prevent you from executing this mission? It was test. Sarah recognized it immediately. Show doubt, lose command. Show fear, lose respect. Show anything except professional competence, and Brennan would replace her with operator who didn't have emotional complications. No, sir, no concerns. I can execute. Good, because you're the best team leader I have for this. Your father trained you well. Let's honor that by bringing Hutchins home. The briefing continued with loadouts and communications protocols and extraction contingencies. Sarah absorbed it all while another part of her mind circled back to funeral on Gray Day, closed casket nobody questioned, grave that held more secrets than remains. Your father died doing the right thing. Ray's words echoed across 15 years. Remember that when people tell you otherwise. What had Ray meant? Who was telling her otherwise? And why did operation to extract DEA chemist feel like walking into past she'd spent her entire adult life trying to honor? After briefing as team dispersed to prepare gear, Ray caught Sarah's arm. His grip gentle but firm, the way you hold something fragile that could still cut you. Walk with me. They walked through corridors that smelled like gun oil and sacrifice. Past rooms where younger soldiers learned to become what Sarah and Ray already were. Outside, morning sun turned parade ground into lake of light. Ray stopped at memorial wall, black granite carved with names. So many names. Men and women who traded futures for someone else's freedom, or at least illusion of freedom. Michael Navarro's name wasn't there. He died dishonored, suspected of collaboration with enemy. No honors, no memorial, no recognition beyond daughter's grief. Your father's last mission was in that exact desert, Ray said quietly. words falling like stones into water. Phantasma Verde. Sarah had suspected, but hearing it confirmed felt like swallowing broken glass. What was he doing there? Investigating Ghost Protocol, he'd received intelligence that someone in Delta Force was facilitating weapons transfers to cartels. Billions of dollars worth of gear, from night vision to rocket launchers. Your father believed it went all the way to Pentagon level. And he died before he could prove it. He died because he could prove it. Ray turned to face her, and for first time in 15 years, Sarah saw something in his eyes that terrified her. Regret. The official story was cartel ambush, but there was never body, never any physical evidence, just burned vehicles and blood that matched his type. Sarah's world tilted slightly, gravity losing purchase. Are you saying he might be alive? I'm saying read this when the mission's over. Ray handed her a small book, leather-bound, worn soft with age. Your father's journal. I kept it safe all these years. He'd want you to have it now. Why now? Ray smiled, sad and final as last sunset. Because I'm dying, Ghost. Stage 4 cancer. 6 months if I'm lucky, 3 if I'm not. This is my last mission. And I figured it was time you knew truth about your old man. The world came back into focus, sharp and cruel. Sarah held journal like it was made of spun glass and broken promises. The truth? That Michael Navarro was best man I ever knew, and that good men die in bad ways when they threaten powerful people's money. Ray squeezed her shoulder. You're just like him. Smart, stubborn, too brave for your own good. That's why I'm telling you this. Because if Ghost Protocol is active again, if someone's still running weapons through that desert, you need to know what you're walking into. I'm walking into hostage extraction. You're walking into same place your father died. In my experience, Ghost, there's no such thing as coincidence. Only patterns we're too blind to see. They stood together in morning light, two soldiers bound by secrets and particular weight of loving men who died unclear deaths. Around them, Fort Bragg hummed with machinery of American power, training men and women to kill strangers in distant places for reasons that would be classified long after killing stopped. Sarah tucked journal into her vest. Thank you, Ray, for everything, for looking after me when Dad couldn't. Your old man is still looking after you. That's what fathers do, even dead ones. Ray turned back toward buildings, especially dead ones. The team gathered in an equipment room that smelled like cordite and possibilities. Each operator moved through personal ritual of preparation, checking gear that had been checked 100 times because proper preparation prevented poor performance and death. Webb assembled his M4 with reverence, each part clicking into place with precision that made engineering look like art. Chen tested detonators and charges, calculating yields in his head, muttering equations under breath. Ortega cleaned rifle scope with cloth that had probably seen more combat zones than most soldiers. Doc organized medical kit for third time, pulling out supplies and repacking them in order that made sense to trauma surgeon operating in darkness. He looked up, caught Sarah watching, smiled that easy smile that made him popular with everyone. You worried about this one, Cap? Always worried. Stops me from getting complacent. That's not what I mean. This feels different. Personal. Your dad and all. Sarah considered lying, decided Doc deserved better. Yeah, it's personal. Same location where he died, same operation he might have been investigating. Feels like walking into a story I don't know the ending to. Stories end when you finish them, or when they finish you. Doc closed his kit, satisfied with the arrangement only he understood. We've got your back either way. That's what teams do. I know. Just wish I knew what we were walking into. Webb looked up from his rifle. According to briefing, we're walking into extraction against 15 to 20 hostiles. Standard operating procedure, in and out before they know we're there. When have ops ever gone according to plan? Chen asked. Never. That's why we train for chaos. Chaos is consistent. Plans are lies we tell ourselves to feel better about uncertainty. Ortega spoke from corner, first words an hour. Mission feels wrong. Everyone turned. When Ortega spoke, people listened. How? Sarah asked. Too clean, too simple. Hostage held in accessible location. Light security, perfect extraction scenario. In my experience, perfect scenarios are usually traps. You think this is ambush? I think we should be prepared for complications beyond briefing parameters. Ray entered, already in full kit, carrying weight of equipment in years with equal competence. He looked at assembled team, his team, Men he'd trained and led and brought home from missions that should have killed them. Final equipment check. Wheels up in 4 hours. Get food, get rest, get your heads right. This is real world. People die in real world when they make mistakes. The team dispersed to individual preparations. Sarah stayed behind, watching Ray organize his own gear with economical movements that spoke of 40 years doing exactly this. Ray, she said quietly, if something happens out there, if this goes wrong, I need to know you'll tell me truth. About my father, about Ghost Protocol, about all of it. Ray stopped moving, stood perfectly still for a moment that stretched into eternity. When he turned, his face showed age and weariness, in something that might have been love, or might have been guilt, or might have been both. If something happens, Ray said carefully, you'll know everything. That's a promise. But Sarah, sometimes truth is worse than lies. Sometimes comfortable story is kinder than complicated reality. Be sure you want truth before you demand it. I've spent 15 years wanting truth. Then you'll get it, one way or another. But be ready for it to change everything you believe. That night, at 2200 hours, Sarah stood on tarmac beside C-130 transport, her team assembled around her. They looked like what they were. Expensive government property wrapped in tactical gear and quiet confidence. The kind of men who jumped out of airplanes into other people's nightmares. Doc checked medical kit for 5th time. Webb test fired his M4 into clearing barrel. Chen studied architectural diagrams on tablet. Ortega cleaned rifle scope with devotion other men reserved for prayer. Ray stood apart, watching them all with expression of man memorizing something he'd soon lose. Brennan approached, tablet in hand, surrounded by invisible force field of command authority. Final intelligence update. Satellite thermal imaging confirms 15 to 20 heat signatures at target location. Building's outer perimeter shows signs of recent fortification. Estimate light to moderate resistance. Extraction plan? Sarah asked. Apache gunships on standby at Arizona border, 12 minutes out if you need close air support. But this is stealth operation. In and out before they know you're there. Standard Delta Force doctrine. And if it's not standard, Brennan's face could have been carved from same stone as Memorial Wall. Then improvise. That's what I pay you for. C-130's engines whined to life. That particular sound that meant transition from safety to violence. Sarah led her team up ramp into belly of machine designed to deliver soldiers into places they shouldn't survive. 20 minutes later, at 30,000 feet above American desert, Sarah sat with her team in red-lit darkness of cargo hold. Below them, civilization thinned to scattered lights, then vanished entirely. Just darkness and stars and ancient lands where empires had died before America was even dreamed. Doc broke silence, his voice carrying over engine roar. You know what I'm going to do when I retire? Tell us again, Webb said, grinning. I love this one. Buy boat. Nothing fancy. Just something that floats and doesn't leak too much. Maybe down in Keys. Spend my days fishing and lying to tourists about size of marlins I've caught. You get seasick in bathtubs, Chen pointed out. Details, I'll adjust. Point is, no more jumping out of perfectly good aircraft. No more eating MREs that taste like regret. No more pretending bullets can't kill me. Bullets can kill anyone, Ortega said quietly. First time he'd spoken in 6 hours. Profound, Luis. You should write fortune cookies. They laughed. That particular laughter men share when they're about to risk death together. Brotherhood condensed into sound. Sarah watched them and felt weight of command settle on her shoulders like snow, cold and patient. Ray sat beside her, checking gear with economical movements. Old hands, steady hands, hands that had killed men on 6 continents and slept soundly every night afterward. You read the journal? He asked quietly. Not yet. You said after the mission. Good. Some things you need to know with clear head. Ray locked eyes with her. But remember this. Your father was investigating Ghost Protocol when he died, and we're going to exact place where he disappeared. If something doesn't feel right down there, you trust your instincts. Not intel, not mission parameters. Your gut. You think it's trap? I think desert keeps secrets, and some people prefer it that way. Loadmaster's voice crackled through headsets. 5 minutes to drop zone, final equipment check. Sarah stood, checking her team one by one. Doc's medical kit secure, Webb's ammunition loadout perfect, Chen's breaching charges properly fused, Ortega's rifle scope calibrated, Ray's gear immaculate as always. She checked her own kit, M4 carbine, 90 rounds across 3 magazines. Sidearm, 2 additional mags. Radio, GPS, night vision. Smoke grenades, fragmentation grenades. Zip ties, trauma kit. Accumulated tools of her trade, each one tested in combat, each one small prayer that today wouldn't be day luck ran out. Ramp lowered. In wind screamed into cargo hold, carrying smell of night and desert and infinite space. Below, darkness absolute. Above, stars that had watched men make terrible decisions since time began. 2 minutes, Loadmaster announced. Sarah's team lined up at ramp, 6 figures silhouetted against void. She took position at front because leaders went first, always. That was deal. Unspoken contract between command and those commanded. Brennan's voice came through headset one final time. Ghost, Hawk Actual, you are cleared for insertion. Remember, Hutchins comes out alive. Everything else is secondary. Copy, Hawk. We'll bring him home. I know you will. That's why I chose you for this. Pause. Your father would be proud, Sarah. Words hit harder than they should have. Sarah blinked against sudden moisture in eyes, blamed it on wind and altitude. 30 seconds, Loadmaster called. Sarah looked back at her team one final time. These men who trusted her, who'd follow her into hell because that's what brothers did. Doc gave thumbs up. Webb grinned like kid on Christmas morning. Chen looked serene. Ortega nodded once, economical as always. Ray met her eyes, and for just a moment, Sarah saw something in his face she couldn't quite identify. It looked almost like goodbye. 10 seconds. Sarah turned forward, facing darkness and drop and desert waiting below like open mouth. 5, 4, 3, 2. She jumped. Team followed. 6 bodies plummeting through night sky at terminal velocity, Earth rushing up with patient inevitability. Sarah counted heartbeats, controlled breathing, watched altimeter on wrist tick down toward moment where she'd pull chute and trade free fall for controlled descent. Around her, 5 other chutes deployed in sequence. Black canopies against blacker sky, invisible from ground, silent as assassination. They glided through darkness, Sarah navigating by GPS, adjusting course with subtle pulls on steering toggles. Desert revealed itself slowly, darkness acquiring texture. Mountains like broken teeth against stars. Valleys that swallowed light, and there, coordinates matching briefing package, cluster of buildings that had once been mining town and was now just ruins pretending to remember civilization. Phantasma Verde, Green Ghost. The town where her father had conducted last mission. Town where he disappeared 15 years ago, leaving behind questions nobody wanted to answer. And daughter who'd spent entire adult life learning to kill people in distant places, trying to understand why good men vanished into desert nights and never came home. Sarah touched down soft as prayer, collapsing chute, immediately scanning for threats. Her team landed in sequence, professional and precise, gathering at rally point without words. Hand signals only. Sound carried in desert air, and they were ghosts here, invisible and lethal. Chen and Webb moved forward to scout perimeter. Doc established casualty collection point. Ortega found elevated ground for overwatch. Ray stayed with Sarah, both studying target building through night vision that turned darkness green and made shadows into soldiers. Building matched briefing photos. 2-story structure, adobe and timber, slowly surrendering to entropy. Windows dark. No visible guards. No signs of recent activity. Exactly 15 thermal signatures inside, clustered in what looked like ground floor room. Too perfect. Too easy. Sarah felt skin on back of neck tighten, that animal instinct that had kept her ancestors alive on different continents, hunting different prey. Something's wrong, she whispered to Ray. Trust your gut, he replied. What's it telling you? That we should abort, that this feels staged. Then we abort. I'll call it in. But before Ray could key radio, Chen's voice came through, urgent and low. Ghost, you need to see this. South perimeter. Now. Sarah moved fast, staying low, weapon up, scanning for targets that weren't there yet but would be. She could feel it in bones. Chen crouched by old wall, pointing at ground. Footprints. Dozens of them. Fresh within last hour, sand still holding sharp edges. Boot prints, military grade. Multiple sizes suggesting different individuals. And something else. Tire tracks. Heavy vehicles, recently departed. This isn't 15 hostiles, Chen said quietly. This is 50, maybe more. And they knew we were coming. Sarah's blood turned to ice water. She keyed radio. Hawk Actual, Ghost, Mission Compromise. Thermal count was wrong. This is much larger force. Static. Then Brennan's voice, but different now. Harder. Colder. Negative, Ghost. Intel is solid. Proceed with mission. Sir, I'm looking at evidence of 50-plus hostiles. Recent departure. This is trap. Captain Navarro, you have your orders. Extract Hutchins. That's direct command. Sarah looked at Ray. He shook his head. Movement so small only she saw it. Don't trust this. Don't trust any of this. But orders were orders. And Hutchins was inside, probably scared, possibly hurt, definitely wondering if anyone was coming to save him. Sarah made decision. Wrong decision, she'd realize later. But in that moment, with team watching and father's ghost whispering in darkness, she made only decision she could. Copy, Hawk, moving to extract. She positioned team. Webb and Chen on point, breaching main entrance. Doc and Ortega providing cover. Ray and Sarah taking approach, ready to suppress any resistance. Standard Delta Force tactics, executed thousands of times in training and dozens in combat. They moved toward building like water, flowing around obstacles, silent and purposeful. Webb reached door, set small breaching charge, stepped back. Charge detonated with flat crack that echoed across empty desert, and doors ceased being obstacle. Webb went through first, weapon up, scanning. Clear. Chen followed. Clear. Sarah entered third, night vision turning interior into green-lit nightmare. Empty room, debris, old furniture. Walls covered in graffiti that might have been warnings if anyone could read language of desperate. Hutchins, Doc called softly. Dr. Hutchins, Delta Force, we're here to extract you. Voice from next room, weak, frightened, American. Here, I'm here, please hurry. They found him in what had once been bedroom. Dr. Robert Hutchins, 63 years old, gray hair wild, eyes wide behind broken glasses. Zip-tied to chair, bruised but alive. He looked at Sarah's team like they were angels descended from heaven he'd stopped believing in. Thank God, he whispered. Thank God. They said no one was coming. Doc cut zip ties, did quick medical assessment. Minor injuries, he can walk. Who took you? Sarah asked. How many? I don't know, 20, 30. Professional soldiers, not cartel thugs. They spoke English. American accents. Hutchins grabbed Sarah's arm, gripped desperate. Captain, this is trap. They wanted me here. They wanted you here. Who did? Ghost Protocol, the network. They're still active, still operating, and they know you're Michael Navarro's daughter. World tilted. Sarah felt Ray's hand on her shoulder, steadying her, grounding her. What did you say? Hutchins pulled phone from pocket, hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. They gave this to me, told me to show you. Screen illuminated, showing photograph. Sarah's breath caught in throat, held captive by impossible image. Photo showed 3 men in Mexican Special Forces uniforms, standing in front of training facility somewhere tropical. First man she didn't recognize. Second was Ray Kowalski, 20 years younger but unmistakable. Third man made Sarah's world fracture into pieces she'd spend years trying to reassemble. Michael Navarro, her father, alive, teaching tactics to foreign soldiers. Sarah looked up at Ray, at man who'd been her mentor, her father's best friend, one person she'd trusted absolutely for 15 years. She saw his face change, saw mask drop away, saw thing beneath that had been hiding there all along. Ray's sidearm came up smooth and fast, aimed not at hostiles but at her team, at Doc and Chen and Webb, at men who trusted him, who'd called him Sergeant Major and Sir, and followed him into darkness because that's what good soldiers did. I'm sorry, Ghost, Ray said, and his voice carried genuine regret. Your father would understand, he always did. That's why he had to disappear. Building exploded. Not literally, but Sarah's perception of reality shattered with same violence as high explosives. Chen and Webb dropped, hit not by bullets, but by some kind of tranquilizer dart. Fast acting, professional. Doc reached for his weapon and Ray shot him. 3 rounds to center mass, suppressed pistol making sounds like wet coughs. Doc went down, blood spreading across tactical vest, eyes wide with betrayal and disbelief. Sarah's weapon came up, but Ray was faster, always faster. 40 years of experience against her 15. He kicked her M4 aside, put pistol against her temple, cold metal promising immediate eternity. Don't, he said quietly. I need you alive. Your father would never forgive me otherwise. My father's dead. Your father's been living in Mexico for 15 years, training cartels to fight system that betrayed him. And he's been waiting for you, Sarah, waiting for you to understand why he had to leave. why some fights can't be won from inside the machine. Outside, desert erupted with lights and engines and sounds of many men moving with military precision. Through broken windows, Sarah saw them. 50 soldiers, maybe more, surrounding building, taking positions, establishing perimeter that nothing could escape. She looked at Doc, bleeding out on floor, kind eyes going distant. She looked at Chen and Webb, unconscious but alive. She looked at Ortega, who'd been on Overwatch and was now probably dead or captured. She looked at Ray, this man she'd trusted, this man who'd held her at her father's funeral and promised everything would be okay. What's up, Aaron? Word came out broken, sound more than question. Because Ghost Protocol was never about smuggling weapons, Sarah. It was about building something outside system, something clean, something that actually protects people instead of politicians' careers. Your father understood that. Eventually you will too. Voice crackled through speakers outside, amplified across desert night, speaking English with slight Mexican accent that somehow sounded familiar in ways Sarah couldn't place. Bienvenida, Capitana Navarro. Tu padre me enseñó bien. Welcome, Captain Navarro. Your father taught me well. Sarah closed her eyes, opened them, looked at Ray. At man who just murdered her teammate and betrayed everything uniform was supposed to mean. She thought about her father's journal, still unread in her vest. She thought about secrets buried in desert sand. She thought about how trust was just another word for vulnerability, and vulnerability was just another way to die. Where's my father? She asked. Ray smiled, sad and final. Waiting for you. He has so much to tell you, Ghost, about honor and duty and what happens when you realize people you're killing for aren't worth the bullets. Soldiers entered building. Professional and calm, disarming Sarah with practiced efficiency. They secured Chen and Webb, confirmed Doc was dying, established casualty collection point with same tactical precision Delta Force had taught them. Because they'd been trained by Americans, by men who knew every protocol, every procedure, every weakness in system they'd once served. Trained by her father, Sarah realized. Trained by Michael Navarro, Ghost who'd chosen to disappear rather than die, who'd traded daughter's love for whatever mission he'd thought was worth sacrifice. They zip-tied Sarah's hands, loaded Chen and Webb onto stretchers, left Doc where he'd fallen. Ray stood over him, looking down at man he'd just killed, and for moments Sarah saw genuine grief in his eyes. He was good soldier, Ray said. They all are. That's what makes this necessary. Sarah said nothing. Words were gone. There was only weight of betrayal, heavy as stones, crushing as time. She watched Doc's chest stop moving, watched light leave eyes, watched teammate, friend, brother, become just another casualty in war nobody would admit existed. They led her outside, into desert night, in artificial light, an assembled machinery of organized violence. 50 men, maybe more. Professional soldiers with American weapons and American training and particular competence that came from learning trade in world's most expensive military. Man weighted by vehicle, 40-something, dark hair shot with gray, wearing tactical gear that had seen genuine use. He watched Sarah approach with eyes she recognized, though she'd never seen them before. Her father's eyes, looking at her from stranger's face. Capitana, man said, I am Gabriel Santos. Your father saved my life once, trained me, made me what I am. And he told me that if anything happened to him, I should watch over his daughter. Santos stepped closer, studying her face like memorizing scripture. You have his eyes, his courage, his stubbornness. He will be very pleased to see you again. My father's dead, Sarah said, though she no longer believed it. Your father is alive, Santos replied, and he's been trying to find you for 15 years. He couldn't risk contact while Ghost Protocol was hunting him. But now, Santos smiled, now we have leverage, we have you. Ray stood nearby, face neutral, weapon ready. Man who'd taught her everything, who'd stood at father's funeral, who'd just murdered Doc Henley in cold blood without hesitation or remorse. Sarah looked at him and understood finally what her father must have understood 15 years ago in this same desert. That uniform didn't make men righteous. That loyalty could be weaponized. That sometimes people you'd die for were ones who'd kill you without losing night's sleep. My team, Sarah said, Chen and Webb, Doc, Ortega. Doc is dead, Santos said simply. Chen and Webb will recover. Ortega is alive and secure. They'll be released when you cooperate. Cooperate with what? With meeting your father. With understanding what Ghost Protocol really is. with choosing which side you're on when world learns that U.S. military has been arming cartels for 2 decades to maintain profitable instability. Santos gestured to helicopter warming up nearby. Your father is waiting, 10 miles south, just across border, in facility that doesn't exist, training soldiers for war nobody admits is happening. Sarah looked at Ray one final time. Did you know my father was alive all these years? Yes. Did you help him fake his death? Yes. Did you lie to me for 15 years while I mourned him? While I joined Delta Force to honor his memory? Ray met her eyes, and for first time since she'd known him, she saw him without mask. Saw operator beneath, cold and calculating and utterly committed to something bigger than honor or oath or trust of daughter who'd needed to believe her father was hero. Yes, Ray said, and I'd do it again, because Michael Navarro is best man I ever knew. And sometimes best men have to become something else to survive in world run by worse men. They loaded Sarah into helicopter, Chen and Webb on stretchers beside her, unconscious but breathing. Doc's body stayed behind, left in desert where he'd fallen, another ghost for Sonoran Sand to keep. As helicopter lifted off, Sarah looked down at Phantasma Verde, town where her father had supposedly died and was apparently reborn. Place where secrets went to hide from scrutiny and soldiers went to become something outside rules. She thought about Doc, about dreams of retirement and fishing boats and lying to tourists about marlins. She thought about Ortega, somewhere below, captured or dead. She thought about Team, broken because she'd trusted wrong people and believed wrong stories. And she thought about her father, waiting 10 miles south, ready to explain why he'd let daughter think he was dead for 15 years. Ready to justify whatever choices had led him from Delta Force operator to cartel trainer to ghost-haunting borderlands. Sarah touched journal in vest, still unread, still sealed with secrets that would either explain everything or destroy whatever fragments of faith she had left. Helicopter banked south, crossing invisible line that separated America from Mexico, law from lawlessness, world she knew from world she was about to enter. Below, desert stretched, infinite and ancient, keeping secrets, burying dead, watching another generation of soldiers learn what their fathers had learned in different wars under different flags. That loyalty could kill you, that duty could betray you, that sometimes only way to survive was to become thing you'd sworn to destroy. Sarah closed eyes and prepared to meet her father's ghost. Behind her in Phantasma Verde, Doc Henley's blood soaked into desert sand, another sacrifice to secrets nobody would admit and wars nobody would acknowledge. Another good man dying for reasons that would never make it into official reports or memorial walls or comfortable stories Americans told themselves about men who killed strangers so they could sleep safely at night. Helicopter flew on, carrying Sarah toward truth or lies or whatever existed in space between, where ghosts lived and fathers became strangers, and only thing certain was that nothing would ever be certain again. Her father was alive. Ray had betrayed her. Doc was dead. Chen and Webb were hurt. Ortega was missing. Mission had been lie. Ghost protocol was real. And somewhere in Mexican darkness, Michael Navarro waited to explain why he'd chosen duty over daughter, mission over family, survival over honor. Sarah opened eyes and looked at Ray, sitting across from her in helicopter, face carved from stone and shadow. When I get free, she said quietly, voice barely audible over rotor noise, I'm going to kill you. Ray nodded slowly, accepting it like weather forecast. I know, your father said same thing once, before he understood. Understood what? That sometimes uniform makes you choose between being good soldier and being good man. And that good men always choose to be good men, even when it costs them everything. Helicopter carried them into darkness and uncertainty and whatever waited on other side of betrayal. Sarah held on to consciousness, onto anger, onto memory of Doc's eyes going distant and Ray's face showing nothing as he pulled trigger. She held on to only truth she had left, that her father was alive, that Ray had lied, that nothing she'd believed was true, and that somewhere in wreckage of trust and duty and 15 years of grief, there was story that would either save her or destroy her. Journal pressed against chest, father's words sealed inside, waiting to be read. But first, she had to survive meeting Ghost. First, she had to survive learning why dead sometimes stay alive, and why living sometimes wish they were dead. First, she had to understand what her father had become in 15 years of hiding from own country, own daughter, own reflection. Helicopter flew on, and Sarah prepared herself for truth. whatever that meant anymore. The helicopter descended through Mexican night like a stone through water, and Sarah Navarro watched her country disappear behind her. Not the geographical borders, those invisible lines drawn by men who'd never bled for them. The country that meant something, the one built on oaths and honor, and the belief that when you wore the uniform, you stood for something bigger than survival. That country vanished somewhere over the Sonoran Desert, left behind with Doc Henley's body and the shattered pieces of trust that had held Sarah's world together for 34 years. Chen and Webb lay unconscious on stretchers beside her, their breathing steady, but their futures uncertain. Ray Kowalski sat across from her, his face illuminated by red cabin lights that made him look like something carved from old leather and older sins. He wasn't the man she'd known for 15 years. He was the thing that had been hiding inside that man, wearing friendship like camouflage, patient as cancer. Gabriel Santos occupied the co-pilot seat, speaking into a radio in rapid Spanish, coordinating whatever waited below. Through the window, Sarah saw lights. Not a village or town, but something organized, structured. A facility that existed in the space between law and lawlessness, where men with American training built armies that served interests too complicated for congressional oversight. The helicopter touched down on a landing pad lit by floods that turned night into artificial day. Armed men waited, 20 or more, wearing tactical gear that looked suspiciously like U.S. military issue. They moved with the coordinated precision of professional soldiers, establishing a security perimeter, scanning for threats that wouldn't come because this place was invisible to satellites and official records. Santos excited first, followed by Ray. Two soldiers helped Sarah down, their grip firm but not cruel, men doing a job they'd been trained for in ways that made her stomach turn with recognition. These were her tactics, Delta Force doctrine, the accumulated knowledge of 40 years of American special operations, now serving a different master. Take Chen and Webb to medical, Santos ordered in English. Full treatment. They're not prisoners, they're guests. Guests don't get tranquilized, Sarah said, her voice flat as desert stone. Santos turned to her, and in better light, she saw the lines around his eyes. The gray threading his hair, the weight of command that sat on shoulders too young to carry it comfortably. 42 years old, maybe 43. Old enough to have served, young enough to still believe in causes. Guests don't usually arrive armed and prepared to kill everyone in the building, Santos replied. Context matters, Capitana. Your father taught me that. The mention of her father hit like a physical blow. Sarah steadied herself, refused to show weakness in front of men who'd been trained to exploit it. Where is he? Waiting, as he has been for 15 years. Santos gestured toward a building, low and modern, that looked like it belonged in Southern California rather than Mexican desert. Come, we have much to discuss. They walked through the facility, and Sarah's tactical mind cataloged everything despite her emotional chaos. Barracks building to the left, capacity for maybe 200 men. Arms room with security that would make Fort Bragg jealous. Training facilities with obstacle courses and kill houses and shooting ranges that stretched into darkness. A motor pool with vehicles bearing no markings, no plates, no evidence they'd ever existed in official records. This wasn't a cartel safe house. This was a military base, complete and professional, operating in shadows while governments pretended it didn't exist. How long has this been here? Sarah asked. 12 years. Your father helped design it, helped recruit the first soldiers, helped establish the training protocols. Ray spoke for the first time since landing, his voice carrying pride that made Sarah want to put a bullet through his skull. This is what Ghost Protocol was always meant to be, not corruption, evolution. You murdered Doc. He had a wife, 2 kids. I killed a soldier who would have compromised the mission. There's a difference, not to his family. Ray stopped when walking, turned to face her. In the floodlights, his face showed every one of his 58 years, carved by decisions that had accumulated like interest on a debt that could never be paid. Doc's family will receive death benefits. They'll believe he died a hero in a classified operation. His kids will grow up proud of their father. That's more than most soldiers get. They'll grow up without a father because you shot him. I shot him because he was about to radio for extraction, which would have brought a quick reaction force, which would have resulted in a bloodbath that killed everyone in that building. I made a choice, Sarah, the same choice your father made 15 years ago. Save one man or save hundreds. It's not complicated math. Sarah wanted to scream, to rage, to let the fury boiling in her chest explode into violence that would solve nothing but feel like justice. Instead, she breathed, controlled her heart rate, fell back on training that had been beaten into her through 1,000 repetitions. Stay calm, assess the situation, find the advantage, exploit the weakness, survive to fight another day. They entered the main building, and the interior looked like a command center transplanted from Fort Bragg. Computer stations, tactical maps, satellite imagery, communications equipment that could coordinate operations across continents. A dozen people worked at various stations, men and women, some in uniform, some in civilian clothes, all moving with the purposeful efficiency of professionals executing a plan. Santos led her through corridors that smelled like air conditioning and the particular tension of military operations. They stopped at a door, heavy steel with biometric locks. Santos pressed his palm to the scanner, and the lock disengaged with a hydraulic hiss. "Your father is inside. He has to speak with you alone." Santos looked at Ray. "We'll debrief afterward. Get the team settled." Ray nodded and walked away, leaving Sarah standing before a door that separated her present from her past, her grief from truth, her understanding of the world from whatever waited on the other side. "One thing, Capitana," Santos said quietly. "Your father is not the man you remember. 15 years changes people. War changes people, and the war he's been fighting is different from the one you know." Sarah said nothing. Words were inadequate for the storm of emotions tearing through her chest. Fear, anger, hope, rage, love, betrayal, all of them fighting for dominance, while she stood frozen before a door that led to a ghost. Santos opened it, gestured her inside, and closed it behind her with a finality that sounded like a casket lid. The room was small, simply furnished. A desk, 2 chairs, a laptop computer, walls covered with maps and photographs, and the accumulated evidence of a life lived in margins and shadows. And standing by the window, silhouetted against Mexican night, a man she'd buried 15 years ago. Michael Navarro turned to face his daughter, and time collapsed into a singularity of recognition and disbelief. He looked older. Of course he did. 58 now, his hair gray where it had been black, his face lined with weather and decisions that left scars invisible to everyone except those who knew how to read them. But his eyes were the same, dark and steady, and carrying the weight of things he'd seen and done and would never speak about to anyone who hadn't walked the same paths. He wore simple clothes, jeans, and a work shirt, looking more like a rancher than a soldier. But his posture was military, spine straight, shoulders back, the bearing of a man who'd spent decades learning to carry weight others couldn't imagine. For a long moment, neither spoke. They just looked at each other across 15 years of grief and lies and absence that had shaped Sarah's entire adult life. Her father alive, the man she'd mourned, celebrated, tried to honor through every mission, every promotion, every time she'd stood before his empty grave and promised to make him proud. "Sarah," Michael said, and his voice broke on her name like waves on rocks. "My God, look at you, you're all grown up." Something inside Sarah shattered. Not broke, shattered, into pieces so small they'd never fit back together the same way. She'd prepared speeches for this moment, imagined it 1,000 times during sleepless nights when grief felt like drowning. Angry words, accusations, demands for explanation. All of it vanished in the face of her father's voice saying her name, and what emerged was a sound she hadn't made since she was 19 years old and standing by a casket that held nothing but lies and military honors. She sobbed once, a single break in her composure that contained 15 years of pain condensed into sound. Then she locked it down, forced control back into place, became Captain Sarah Navarro again, instead of the grieving daughter who'd buried her father and then tried to become him. "You're alive," she said, stating the obvious because sometimes the obvious needed to be spoken to become real. "I'm alive. You let me think you were dead. I had to protect you, to protect your mother, to survive long enough to expose the people who turned Ghost Protocol from a mission into a money laundering operation that's killed thousands. Doc Henley is dead. Ray shot him. Your best friend murdered my teammate because of whatever this is." Sarah's voice hardened, anger providing structure when emotion threatened to collapse her. "So tell me, Dad, tell me why letting your daughter mourn you for 15 years, why letting Ray put a bullet in a good man, why all of this was worth it." Michael moved to the desk, opened the laptop, his movements carrying the careful precision of a man who'd learned to live with constant threat. The screen illuminated, showing files, photographs, documents. "Sit down, Sarah. This is going to take a while." "I'll stand." "Sit down, Captain. That's not a request from your father. That's an order from a superior officer who still outranks you." The words hit like a slap. Sarah sat, more from shock than obedience, watching her father become someone else. Not the man who taught her to ride a bike and shoot a rifle and believe that serving your country meant something. Someone harder, colder, forged in fires she couldn't imagine. Michael pulled up a file and photographs filled the screen. Military personnel, high-ranking officers, politicians, CIA officials. 47 faces, each one captioned with name, rank, and role. Ghost Protocol started in 2007, Michael began, his voice taking on the cadence of a briefing, professional and detached. The original mission was simple: provide limited weapon support to moderate cartel factions to prevent extremist organizations from gaining control of drug trafficking routes. The theory was that stable cartels were better than unstable ones. Predictable violence instead of chaos. That's insane. That's policy. We did the same thing in Afghanistan, arming Mujahideen to fight Soviets. Same strategy, different desert. It worked until it didn't. Michael clicked through documents, showing shipping manifests, financial records, names and dates, and crimes that added up to treason on a scale that made Sarah's head spin. By 2009, Ghost Protocol had evolved. The officers running it realized they could make billions by expanding the operation. Not just small arms to moderate cartels, heavy weapons to anyone who'd pay, rocket launchers, anti-aircraft missiles, explosives, night vision, everything that makes an insurgency into an army. You discovered this. I discovered a discrepancy in shipping records. Weapons going out, money coming back, but the amounts didn't match. Someone was skimming. I started investigating, quietly, through back channels, and I found something worse than corruption. Michael's face hardened, and Sarah saw the man who'd earned his Delta Force tab through the kind of selections that broke 9 out of 10 candidates. I found that some of those weapons were going to terrorist organizations, not cartels, not criminal enterprises, actual terrorists planning attacks on American targets. Sarah felt cold spread through her chest. Jesus Christ. I brought it to Ray. He was my team sergeant, my friend, the man I trusted more than anyone except your mother. I showed him the evidence, told him we needed to go to the Inspector General, blow the whole thing open. Michael's voice went quiet, almost breaking. And Ray told me that if I did that, you and your mother would be dead within 24 hours. The room seemed to shrink, air becoming too thick to breathe properly. Sarah stared at her father, at this ghost explaining why he'd chosen to become one. The people running Ghost Protocol had resources everywhere: military, intelligence, law enforcement. Ray said they'd already identified me as a security risk, that they'd given him a choice: kill me or they'd kill my family. All of us. So he offered you a third option. He offered me a chance to disappear, to fake my death, go underground, and help him dismantle Ghost Protocol from the inside. He said it would take a few years, maybe 5. Long enough to document everything, build an airtight case, protect you and your mother while taking down the entire network. Michael laughed, bitter as ash. It's been 15 years, and we're still fighting the same fight. Sarah stood, paced the small room, her mind racing through implications and questions, and the fundamental recalculation of everything she'd believed about duty and honor and the men who'd raised her. Why didn't you contact me? In 15 years, you couldn't find a way to let me know you were alive? Every communication was monitored, every phone call traced, every email logged. The people running Ghost Protocol had NSA-level surveillance capabilities. One mistake, one moment of weakness, and they'd have found me. Found you. Killed everyone I'd ever cared about. Michael's voice cracked. You think I didn't want to? You think I didn't watch you from a distance? See you join the Army? Make it through Delta Force selection? Become everything I'd hoped you'd be? Every day, Sarah. Every single day I thought about reaching out. And every day I knew that doing so would get you killed. But you're telling me now. Why now? What changed? What changed is that I have everything I need. 15 years of documentation. Names, dates, transactions, recorded conversations. Evidence that proves Ghost Protocol goes all the way to Pentagon level, involves serving generals, active CIA directors, politicians who campaigned on law and order while making billions from drug war instability. Michael turned the laptop toward her, showing file after file of damning evidence. Financial records showing money flowing from cartels to numbered accounts traced back to military officers. Shipping manifests for weapons that officially didn't exist. Photographs of clandestine meetings between American officials and cartel leadership. Video recordings of classified briefings discussing Ghost Protocol operations. "This is enough to bring down half the defense establishment," Sarah whispered. "This is enough to prove that the United States military has been operating as the world's largest arms dealer to criminal organizations for nearly 2 decades. It'll destroy careers, end administrations, maybe even trigger congressional inquiries that actually have teeth." "And you need me to do what? Help you leak this?" "I need you to understand why I did what I did. Why Ray did what he did. Why Santos and 200 men here are willing to die to expose a system so corrupt it makes cartels look honest." Michael stood, moved closer to his daughter, and Sarah saw tears in his eyes. Real tears from a man who'd probably forgotten how to cry somewhere between Fallujah and whatever hell he'd lived through since. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to help me finish this. To take down the people who turned American military power into a profit center that's killed thousands. To make sure that when I finally die for real, it means something." Sarah wanted to say yes, wanted to embrace her father, forgive everything, join his crusade against corruption and institutional evil. Every instinct screamed at her to trust this man who'd raised her, who'd taught her everything about being a soldier, who'd shaped her into the weapon she'd become. But Doc Henley was dead. Chen and Webb were unconscious in a medical facility run by a cartel-trained army. Luis Ortega was missing, probably captured, possibly dead. Her team was destroyed because she trusted the wrong people and walked into a trap her father had helped design. "I need to think," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "I need time to process this, all of this." "I know. Take whatever time you need, but understand something, Sarah. Colonel Brennan knows you're here. He knows you've seen evidence of Ghost Protocol, and he's not going to let you walk away with that knowledge. He can't. Too many powerful people have too much to lose." "Brennan's involved?" "Brennan's been involved since the beginning, not the architect, but a key player. He approved shipments, authorized transfers, signed off on operations that he knew would result in civilian casualties. Your colonel, the man who sent you on this mission, did so knowing it was a trap, knowing that Ray would intercept you, knowing that I'd be waiting." The betrayal layered itself deeper, each revelation adding weight until Sarah felt like she was drowning in institutional corruption that reached so high she couldn't see the top. "Everyone I trusted," she said slowly, "everyone I believed in, was lying. Not everyone. Your team wasn't. Doc died because he was a good man who believed in the oath he took. Chen and Webb are unconscious because they trusted their leadership. Ortega's missing because he was doing his job with honor and skill. They're not the problem, Sarah. The system that sent them into a trap is the problem." Michael pulled something from his desk drawer. A journal, leather-bound, worn soft with handling. Sarah recognized it immediately. Ray had given her an identical copy before the mission. "This is your copy," Michael said, holding it out. "Everything I learned, everything I discovered, everything that led me to this moment. Ray was supposed to give it to you after the mission, but I think you should read it now, before you make a decision about which side you're on." Sarah took the journal, felt its weight in her hands. Her father's words, preserved in ink and paper, explaining choices that had destroyed their family and created a daughter who'd spent 15 years trying to honor a ghost. "There are no sides, Dad. There's just right and wrong. If only it were that simple. But you're going to learn what I learned, that sometimes the people doing wrong think they're doing right. And sometimes the only way to fight institutional evil is to become something outside the institution." A knock at the door interrupted them. Santos entered without waiting for permission, his face tight with tension. That meant bad news. "We have a problem. Brennan just moved a CIA paramilitary team to the border. 30 operators, full tactical support, preparing for an incursion into Mexico. They're coming for her." Santos nodded at Sarah. "ETA 4 hours." "Can we hold them?" Michael asked. "If we want to turn this into a war zone that draws Mexican military attention and international condemnation, yes." If we want to maintain operational security and not trigger a diplomatic incident, no. Then we evacuate, move Sarah to the secondary location, scatter the evidence across multiple sites, activate the dead man protocols. Already in motion, but Michael, if we run now, we lose our leverage. They'll deny everything, classify the evidence, make this entire facility disappear along with everyone in it. Sarah listened to them plan, watched her father and this cartel commander discuss tactics with the fluency of men who'd worked together so long. They finished each other's thoughts, and she realized something that made her stomach turn with implication. Her father wasn't being held hostage by Santos. He wasn't a prisoner who'd been turned or coerced. He was a partner, a willing participant in an organization that existed outside law, outside oversight, outside any authority except its own sense of justice. You trained them, Sarah said, interrupting. All of them. 200 men with American tactics, American weapons, American doctrine. You built an army, Dad. Michael met her eyes, didn't flinch from the accusation. I built a force capable of exposing and destroying Ghost Protocol. Yes, it required compromises. It required working with people who'd done terrible things. It required becoming something I'd spent my career fighting. He stepped closer, and Sarah saw the cost written in every line of his face. But the alternative was letting corrupt officers continue trafficking weapons that kill innocents while wrapping themselves in the flag and calling it patriotism. I chose the lesser evil, Sarah. Just like you'll have to. I won't have to choose anything if Brennan's team kills me in 4 hours. Then we make sure you survive the next 4 hours. And then you decide whether your oath is to the Constitution or to the people currently violating it. Michael turned to Santos. Get her to the secondary location. Full security detail. If anyone tries to intercept, they have authorization to engage. Wait. Sarah held up a hand, her tactical mind overriding emotional chaos, because that's what 15 years of training had taught her. If Brennan's coming with 30 operators, they're not coming to arrest me. They're coming to silence me, which means they're willing to cross into Mexico, violate international law, and start a firefight that could trigger a diplomatic crisis. That's not a rescue. That's a cleanup operation. Exactly, Michael said grimly. You're not a wayward operator who needs extraction. You're a loose end that needs tying off, and they'll tie it off with bullets and then blame it on cartel violence. Sarah thought fast, sorting through tactical options with the speed that had made her one of Delta Force's top operators. What about my team? Chen, Webb, wherever Ortega is, they're loose ends too. Chen and Webb are secure here. Medical says they'll be conscious in an hour. Ortega was captured by Ray's team, but he's being held separately. They'll be protected. Protected by who? The cartel army my father built? That's not protection. That's just different captors. It's protection by men who have no interest in killing them, Santos interjected. Brennan's team will execute anyone connected to you to maintain operational security. We'll keep them alive because dead operators draw investigations. Living operators can be released after the story breaks. It's pragmatic, not merciful, but the end result is the same. The logic was sound, horrifyingly sound, the kind of calculus that reduced human lives to variables in equations of survival and exposure. Sarah had made similar calculations on a dozen missions, deciding who lived and who died based on mission parameters and acceptable casualties. But those had been enemy combatants. These were her brothers, men she'd trained with, fought beside, trusted with her life. And now they were pawns in a game between her father's crusade and the institutional corruption he was fighting. I want to see them, Chen and Webb, now before I make any decisions about cooperation or evacuation or any of this. Michael and Santos exchanged glances, communication flowing without words in the way of men who'd operated together long enough to read each other's intentions. Fine, Michael said, but we're on a clock. Brennan's team is moving fast and they're good. As good as you. Maybe better because they're not operating under rules of engagement. They're operating under instructions to eliminate all witnesses. They walked through corridors that felt increasingly like a prison, despite the professional atmosphere. The courteous soldiers, the medical facility that looked like it belonged in a trauma center rather than a cartel compound. Sarah kept her tactical awareness sharp, noting exits, weapons, potential hostages if this went bad, and she needed leverage. The medical wing smelled like antiseptic and the particular tension of soldiers hovering between life and death. Chen and Webb occupied beds in a room that looked like military hospital transported to Mexico. IV drips, monitoring equipment, trained medics checking vitals with professional competence. Webb was starting to wake, his eyes fluttering, his breathing deepening from sedative-induced shallow to normal human rhythms. Chen remained unconscious, but his vital signs looked stable, strong, the body of a man who'd survived worse and would survive this. Sarah stood between their beds, looking at two men who'd followed her into hell because that's what brothers did, and felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders like stones. Every decision she made rippled outward, affecting lives, ending careers, killing people, or saving them based on choices that seemed clear in briefing rooms, but turned muddy in the field. "They'll be okay," a medic said, young woman in scrubs who looked competent and calm. The tranquilizer was measured perfectly. No permanent damage. They'll wake with headaches, maybe some nausea, but nothing serious. "And then what? You keep them here, prisoners, in a medical wing?" "Guess," Santos corrected, standing in the doorway. "Free to move within the facility once they're cleared medically. Your father wants to brief them on Ghost Protocol. Give them the same choice he's giving you. The choice to betray everything we've sworn to uphold, or die at the hands of our own command structure. Great options. The choice to expose corruption or enable it through silence. There's a difference." Webb's eyes opened fully, focused, immediately scanning the room for threats with the automatic response of a soldier who'd woken in hostile territory more times than he could count. He saw Sarah relax slightly, then tensed again as he processed the unfamiliar surroundings. "Cap?" His voice came out rough, dry. "Where are we?" "Mexico, cartel facility. You and Chen were tranquilized during the extraction. Doc's dead. Ray shot him." Webb processed this with the speed of a man trained to adapt to battlefield chaos. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, rage, and finally cold acceptance that his world had just fundamentally changed. "Ray, Sergeant Major Kowalski, traitor, murderer. Currently working with a man named Gabriel Santos, who runs this facility and has been partnered with my father for 15 years. Your father's dead. My father's alive, in the next building, explaining why he faked his death and spent 15 years building a cartel army to expose institutional corruption in the U.S. military." Webb stared at her for a long moment, then started laughing. Not funny laughter. The kind that comes when reality breaks so completely that humor is the only response that makes sense. Okay, so we're in Mexico, held by cartels. Your dead father's alive and commanding them. Ray's a traitor. Doc's dead, and our own command structure is trying to kill us. Do I have that right? That's accurate. Cool. Just wanted to make sure I understood before I started screaming. Webb sat up slowly, testing his body, finding it responsive despite chemical assault. "What's the play, Cap?" "I don't know yet. That's a first. You always know the play. This situation is outside my operational parameters. I'm trying to process 15 years of lies while Brennan moves a kill team toward our location with a 4-hour head start." "Then let me simplify it for you," Webb said, swinging his legs off the bed. "We're Delta Force operators. Our oath is to the Constitution, not to corrupt officers violating it. If your father has evidence of weapons trafficking, we help him expose it. If Brennan's sending killers instead of rescuers, we defend ourselves. It's not complicated. It's treason. It's justice. There's a difference." The same words Santos had used. The same logic her father had followed. The same justification every insurgent and revolutionary and terrorist had ever used to explain why their violence was righteous, while official violence was corrupt. Sarah felt the foundations of her worldview cracking, each revelation adding pressure, until she didn't know what she believed anymore beyond immediate tactical necessities. Survive. Protect her team. Find truth in the wreckage of lies. "We need to secure Ortega," Sarah decided, because action was better than paralysis. "Where is he?" "Separate holding facility," Santos said. "Ray wanted him isolated in case you required persuasion. Insurance, he called it. Take me to him, now. And someone find me a weapon. I'm not walking around this place unarmed any longer." Michael appeared in the doorway, as if summoned by his daughter's tone. He held out a pistol, Sig Sauer P3-20, the same model Sarah had carried on a dozen missions. "Loaded, 15 rounds, you know the weapon." Sarah took it, checked the chamber, verified the magazine, felt the familiar weight settle into her hand like coming home. Armed again, dangerous again, in control of at least one variable in an equation spinning toward chaos. Show me where Ortega is, then show me this evidence you've spent 15 years collecting. Then we're going to have a conversation about what happens next. And Dad? She met her father's eyes, let him see the cold fury that had been building since Ray shot Doc. If any of this is lies, if you're manipulating me the same way Ray did, I'll put a bullet in you myself, family or not. Understood? Michael smiled, sad and proud and heartbroken all at once. Understood. You're my daughter, Sarah. I wouldn't expect anything less. They moved through the facility, Sarah armed and alert, Webb walking beside her despite medical orders to rest. Chen still unconscious but stable. Santos leading them toward wherever they were keeping Ortega. The clock ticked down toward Brennan's arrival, each second bringing them closer to a confrontation that would either expose decades of corruption or bury it under bodies and classified reports. Sarah thought about Doc, about his wife and kids, and dreams of fishing boats, about the empty space at his dinner table, the flag that would be presented to his family, the lies they'd be told about how he died heroically serving his country. She thought about Ray, the man who'd been like a second father, standing over Doc's body and justifying murder with mission objectives and calculated coldness that made tactical sense, but moral none. She thought about her actual father, alive and weathered and leading an army in Mexican shadows, fighting corruption with compromises that made him indistinguishable from the enemies he'd once hunted. And she thought about herself, Captain Sarah Navarro, Delta Force operator, carrying 15 years of grief and rage and a pistol that felt like the only honest thing in a world built on lies. The next 4 hours would determine whether she became a traitor or a hero, whether her father was a visionary or a criminal, whether the uniform still meant anything or was just expensive fabric wrapped around the same old corruption that had poisoned institutions since men first organized into tribes and called it civilization. Sarah checked her weapon one more time and prepared for whatever came next. Truth or death, or the murky space between where most soldiers actually lived. The space where good men made terrible choices and called it duty. Luis Ortega sat in darkness that smelled like concrete and old fear, his hands zip-tied behind his back, his body aching from the fall that had ended his overwatch position. He'd seen the ambush unfold through his rifle scope, watched Doc Henley go down, seen Ray Kowalski become someone else, and made the tactical decision to stay hidden rather than engage 50 hostiles with one rifle and limited ammunition. Tactical decision. That's what he'd call it in the after-action report, if there ever was an after-action report, if any of them survived long enough to write one. But sitting in Mexican darkness with plastic cutting into his wrists, Ortega knew the truth. He'd hidden because engaging meant dying, and dying meant never seeing his daughter graduate high school next month, never making good on the promises he'd made during his third and final marriage, never proving that soldiers could come home and stay home. The door opened, flooding the room with light that made Ortega squint against sudden brightness. Two figures entered, backlit and unidentifiable until his eyes adjusted and he saw Captain Sarah Navarro flanked by a man he didn't recognize. Relief hit him like a physical force. His captain, his team leader, the woman who'd led them through 3 deployments and always brought them home. She was alive, armed, and looking at him with eyes that held more pain than he'd ever seen in combat. "Sir," Ortega said, using the informal Delta Force address that meant respect without rigid protocol. "Good to see you." "Good to see you too, Luis." Sarah moved behind him, cut the zip ties with a knife that appeared from somewhere. "You hurt?" "Bruised pride, mostly. Some ribs that don't feel great. Nothing that won't heal." He stood slowly, testing his body, finding it functional despite abuse. "Doc?" "Dead. Ray shot him." Ortega absorbed this without visible reaction. But Sarah saw his jaw tighten, saw the cold rage that entered eyes that had looked through rifle scopes at men about to die. "Ray Kowalski is dead to me," Ortega said quietly. "When this is over, I'm going to kill him. Not for revenge, for justice. Because men who betray their brothers deserve killing." "You'll have to get in line," Webb said, appearing in the doorway. "I called dibs already." The reunion should have been joyful. Team members finding each other alive against odds that said they should all be corpses in Mexican desert. But Doc's absence hung over them like smoke, making every word feel hollow, every breath feel stolen from a man who had died because he trusted the wrong people. Santos entered the room, his presence commanding attention through sheer competence, and the tactical gear that marked him as someone who knew how soldiers thought. "We need to move." Brennan's kill team crossed the border 20 minutes ago. ETA 90 minutes to this location. We're evacuating to secondary site, but first Captain Navarro insisted on retrieving you. Appreciated, Ortega said. Where's Chen? Medical facility. Unconscious but stable. He'll be moved with us. Santos checked his watch. Expensive and tactical. But we're burning time we don't have. Brennan brought Apache gunships and AC-130 close air support. This isn't extraction, it's erasure. He's planning to level this facility and blame it on cartel infighting. Sarah felt the tactical situation closing around her like a fist. 90 minutes until 30 operators backed by air power arrived to kill everyone who knew about Ghost Protocol. Her team scattered, wounded, operating in hostile territory with no support from command because command was the enemy. The absurdity of it should have been funny. Delta Force operator hunted by Delta Force operators, the same training and doctrine turned against itself in a fight that came down to who was willing to violate more rules to achieve their objective. I need to see the evidence, Sarah said. All of it. Every file, every document, every piece of proof that Ghost Protocol is real and worth dying for. Because if we're going to fight our own people, if we're going to become traitors or heroes depending on who writes the history, I need to know it's justified. This way, her father said, appearing like a ghost himself. Michael Navarro moved with the quiet authority of a man who'd commanded respect across decades of service. I've prepared a briefing, everything I have, everything Ray and I collected over 15 years. They walked through corridors that felt increasingly like a countdown, each step bringing them closer to decision points that would define the rest of their lives. Sarah's team followed, 3 operators and a father she'd buried 15 years ago, heading toward truth or lies or whatever existed in the space between. The briefing room looked like something from CIA headquarters. Large screens, computer terminals, secure communications equipment. Michael moved to a console, typed commands that brought files to life across multiple displays. Ghost Protocol began as Operation Desert Shield in 2007, Michael started, his voice carrying the professional detachment of a career soldier delivering classified briefing. The premise was counterinsurgency through controlled instability, provide limited weapons support to moderate cartel factions to prevent extremist organizations from destabilizing the border region. Images appeared on screen, shipping manifests showing weapons transfers from U.S. military arsenals to Mexican destinations, financial records tracking money flowing from numbered accounts, photographs of military officers meeting with cartel leadership in locations that officially didn't exist. The operation was classified at the highest levels. Presidential finding, congressional oversight limited to Gang of 8, executed by CIA paramilitary division with Delta Force support. I was assigned as case officer in 2008, tasked with vetting cartel contacts and ensuring weapons went to intended recipients. Webb leaned forward, studying the documents with the focus of a man who understood supply chains and logistics. How much hardware are we talking about? Initially, small arms, night vision, communications equipment, maybe $20 million worth over 2 years. Enough to give moderate cartels advantage over extremists, not enough to trigger international incident. Michael pulled up more files and the numbers grew exponentially. By 2009, the operation expanded. Someone realized that unstable borders were profitable. Drug interdiction budgets increased every year that violence escalated. Defense contractors made billions selling border security equipment. Private prisons filled with detainees. Entire industries built on maintaining crisis instead of solving it. Sarah felt sick. Not physical nausea, but the moral vertigo that comes from watching foundations crumble beneath beliefs you'd built your life upon. You're saying the U.S. government deliberately armed cartels to maintain profitable instability. I'm saying elements within the government did so, not policy, conspiracy, officers who saw opportunity and took it, generals who approved shipments in exchange for consulting positions with defense contractors, politicians who voted for border security funding while taking campaign contributions from companies profiting from chaos, CIA officials who used drug money to fund off-books operations. Michael pulled up a list. 47 names, each one linked to specific actions, documented crimes, evidence that could destroy careers and topple administrations. These are the Ghost Protocol network, the people who turned counterinsurgency into criminal enterprise. Some are true believers who think they're protecting America through necessary evil. Most are just profiteers wrapping theft in national security classification. Ortega studied the list, his sniper's eye for detail catching something others might miss. Colonel Brennan is on here. Approval authority for weapons shipments, financial beneficiary through wife's consulting firm. He's been making money off this for 15 years. Brennan's middle management. Important, but not the architect. Michael zoomed in on one name at the top of the hierarchy. This is the man who designed Ghost Protocol, who recruited the key players, who's been coordinating the network since the beginning. The name hit Sarah like a bullet. General Marcus Vance, Secretary of Defense nominee, former Delta Force commander. The man who'd spoken at her father's funeral and promised that Michael Navarro had died a hero. No, Sarah whispered. Vance was your friend. He commanded you. He spoke at your funeral. He organized my funeral because I discovered his connection to Ghost Protocol and threatened to expose him. Michael's voice went cold, carrying 15 years of betrayal. Vance gave Ray the order, kill me or my family dies. Ray chose a third option, faking my death, but only because Vance allowed it. He needed someone inside the operation to monitor for further leaks. Ray became that person, and I became a ghost. Webb stood, paced the room like a caged animal. This is insane. Vance is about to be confirmed as Secretary of Defense. He'll have control over the entire military, budget authority, operational command, access to every classified program in the Department of Defense. Which is why we're out of time, Santos interjected. Vance's confirmation hearing is in 3 days. Once he's confirmed, he'll have the power to classify Ghost Protocol evidence, eliminate witnesses, and bury this entire story under national security restrictions that will last 50 years. Sarah looked at the evidence filling multiple screens. Years of documentation, thousands of crimes, billions of dollars in weapons and money flowing through channels that turned American military power into criminal enterprise. All of it proven, sourced, ready to destroy the career of a man about to become one of the most powerful officials in the government. Why didn't you release this already? Why wait until now? Because releasing it without protection means getting killed before it matters, Michael said. Snowden released classified evidence and spent years in Russian exile. Manning released documents and went to prison. Assange published leaks and hid in an embassy for 7 years. I've spent 15 years learning from their mistakes, building not just evidence, but a distribution network that can't be stopped. Michael pulled up a schematic showing digital infrastructure across multiple countries. Deadman switches, encrypted servers, journalist contacts, congressional allies, international news organizations all primed to receive and publish simultaneously. If I die, if Ray dies, if Santos or anyone in the primary network is killed, the evidence goes live automatically. Every document, every photograph, every recording published simultaneously across 200 outlets in 30 countries. Too big to suppress, too documented to dismiss, too distributed to stop. That's why Brennan's coming with kill authorization, Webb realized. They have to eliminate everyone before the dead man's switch triggers. All of us. Everyone who knows. Exactly. You, me, Sarah, Chen, Ortega, Santos, every soldier in this facility. 200 people who know enough to corroborate the evidence if it goes public. Brennan has 90 minutes to kill all of us and make it look like cartel violence. Sarah's tactical mind sorted through options, discarding impossible ones, identifying slim chances of survival against overwhelming force. 30 Delta Force operators backed by air power versus 200 cartel soldiers in a facility that wasn't designed for defensive siege. The math was brutal. We can't win a stand-up fight, as she said. Apache gunships will shred this place in minutes. A C-130 has enough firepower to level the entire compound. Brennan's not coming to arrest us. He's coming to commit mass murder and blame it on the drug war. Then we don't fight, her father said. We evacuate. Santos has prepared for this scenario. Multiple escape routes, cached supplies, safe houses across 3 countries. We scatter, make Brennan choose between chasing us or securing the evidence. He'll do both. Then we make him fail at both. Santos moved to a tactical display showing the facility and surrounding terrain. Primary evacuation route runs through tunnel system to vehicle staging area 3 kilometers south. We can move 200 personnel in 30 minutes. Secondary routes provide redundancy if primary is compromised. Ortega studied the map with professional interest. What's the terrain between here and staging area? Desert, broken ground, limited cover, perfect for air interdiction if they spot us moving. So we need deception. Make them think we're here when we're already gone. Exactly. We leave skeleton crew to maintain thermal signatures, use mannequins and heat sources to simulate full facility, then collapse the tunnels behind us after evacuation. By the time Brennan realizes he's attacking empty buildings, we're dispersed across Mexico. It was good tactics, professional planning, the kind of operational security that came from men who'd learned their trade in special forces and applied it to staying alive in hostile territory. But something bothered Sarah, some detail that didn't fit the pattern. Why here, she asked. Why build this facility so close to the border? Why not deeper in Mexico where U.S. forces can't reach easily? Michael and Santos exchanged glances, communication flowing without words. Because we're not hiding from U.S. forces, Michael said. We're showing them the consequences of Ghost Protocol. Every cartel soldier Santos trains here, every weapon we document crossing the border, every crime we catalog is evidence of what happens when military power serves profit instead of protection. We're not running an operation, we're building a case. By becoming exactly what you claim to oppose, training cartel soldiers, operating outside law, killing anyone who threatens your mission, you've become the thing you are fighting. We've become what's necessary to fight it. There's a difference. Not to Doc's family, not to the people you've killed, not to anyone who still believes the uniform means something. The words hung in the air between father and daughter, 15 years of separation and grief and betrayal compressed into accusations that neither could fully answer because both were partially right. Michael moved closer to Sarah, and she saw her own eyes looking back at her, the same determination and stubbornness that had carried her through Delta Force selection and kept her alive through deployments that killed better soldiers. I know what I've become, Michael said quietly. I know what I've sacrificed. Honor, integrity, the right to call myself soldier. I've made terrible compromises with terrible people, trained men who'll use those skills to hurt innocents, enabled crimes in service of exposing bigger crimes. I'm not asking you to approve. I'm asking you to understand that sometimes the only way to fight institutional evil is to become something outside the institution. That's what every terrorist says to justify atrocity. Yes, it is, and sometimes they're right. The Continental Army was terrorist organization to the British. The French resistance were terrorists to Nazis. The Mujahideen were freedom fighters when they killed Soviets and terrorists when they killed Americans. The label changes based on who wins. The actions remain the same. Sarah wanted to argue to defend the moral clarity that had sustained her through years of killing strangers in distant places for reasons classified above her pay grade. But standing in a cartel facility built by her dead father using American tactics to fight American corruption, that clarity felt like childhood faith, comforting but ultimately insufficient for adult complexity. I need to think, Sarah said. I need time to process this before Brennan arrives and forces a decision. You have 1 hour, Santos said, checking his watch. After that, we evacuate whether you're with us or not. Your team comes with us either way. They're witnesses. Brennan will kill them. My team makes their own decisions. Your team follows your lead. They always have. Sarah looked at Webb and Ortega, at two men who trusted her judgment through missions that should have killed them, and saw the same question in their eyes. What now? Where do we go from here? Who do we trust when everyone we trusted has betrayed us? Give us the room, Sarah said to Michael and Santos. I need to talk to my people, alone. They left without argument, Santos taking his tactical competence elsewhere, Michael carrying his guilt and justifications, and 15 years of lies out the door. The room felt larger without them, emptier, just three soldiers trying to figure out how to survive in a world that had suddenly become hostile from every direction. Options, Sarah said, falling back on military structure because structure was safe when everything else was chaos. Webb, tactical assessment. Webb moved to the displays, studying satellite imagery and tactical overlays with the focus that had made him one of Delta Force's top operations planners. Brennan's force is overwhelming if we stay here. 30 operators, air support, complete tactical advantage. We can't win that fight. Santos's evacuation plan is solid, professional, probably our best chance of survival. But it means going deeper into Mexico, relying on cartel infrastructure, becoming fugitives from our own country. Ortega, sniper perspective. Ortega thought for a moment, his taciturn nature making every word count. Brennan's not just trying to kill us. He's trying to protect Vance. If we die, the evidence probably goes public anyway through the dead man switches. But without live witnesses, it's easier to dismiss as fabrication or foreign propaganda. They need us dead, but they also need the evidence buried. Which means that there's a third option nobody's mentioned. We don't run, we don't fight, we negotiate. Tell Brennan we'll testify before Congress. Go public with everything, but only if they guarantee our safety. Use the dead man's switch as leverage instead of last resort. Sarah considered it. Wargaming scenarios against men she'd trained with, men who thought like her because they'd all learned from the same instructors using the same doctrine. Brennan won't negotiate. He has orders to eliminate witnesses. Those orders come from people who'll go to prison if we testify. They're desperate, which makes them dangerous. Desperate people don't make deals when murder is easier. Then we're back to running or dying, Webb said. Or we expose everything right now. Trigger the dead man's switch ourselves. Put the evidence public before Brennan arrives. Once it's out, killing us doesn't serve any purpose. Ortega shook his head. Michael said if he triggers early, he loses control of the narrative. Media organizations need time to verify, investigate, build stories that can't be dismissed. Dump it all at once and it gets lost in noise. Everybody's an expert, nobody knows anything. Truth becomes an opinion. So we're trapped. Can't fight, can't run, can't negotiate, can't expose. Those are the options? Those are the obvious options, a voice said from the doorway. Ray Kowalski entered the room and 3 weapons came up simultaneously. 3 fingers on 3 triggers. 3 soldiers who decided this man deserved killing. Don't, Ray said calmly, holding his hands visible and empty. If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead. I came to offer something nobody else has. The truth. Not Michael's version, not Santos's version, not the sanitized story you'll get from official reports. The actual truth about what happened 15 years ago and why we're all here now. The truth is you murdered Doc, Sarah said, her pistol aimed at Ray's center mass, finger taking up trigger. Slack. You shot a good man because he was going to call for help. That's the only truth that matters. I shot a good man to prevent a bloodbath that would have killed everyone in that building, plus the quick reaction force that responded. Sometimes good men die so better men can survive. You've made that calculation on every mission you have commanded. Don't pretend moral superiority when you've just been lucky enough to not face the choice directly. The words hit because they were true. Sarah had called in airstrikes that killed civilians sheltering combatants, had approved missions that risked team members for strategic objectives, had made the cold calculus that reduced human lives to acceptable losses in service of something bigger. But Doc had been her friend, her brother, someone she'd promised to bring home, and Ray had taken that promise and turned it into another lie in a career apparently built on lies. Talk fast, Sarah said, and if I don't like what I hear, I'm pulling this trigger. Ray moved into the room, slow and unthreatening, his body language broadcasting submission even while his eyes stayed alert for threats. He was 58, looking older tonight, carrying decades of decisions that had accumulated into something that resembled regret, but might just be exhaustion. Michael told you that Vance ordered him killed. That's true. He told you I helped him fake his death instead. Also true. What he didn't tell you is why Vance gave that order, and why I've spent 15 years maintaining the lie. Ray pulled a tablet from his vest, pulled up files that looked different from Michael's organized evidence. These were raw, unedited, the kind of intelligence that never made it into official reports because it was too messy or too compromising or too true. Ghost Protocol started as legitimate counterinsurgency, but by 2008, someone was skimming. Weapons going out didn't match weapons arriving. Money flowing back didn't match money sent. Michael investigated, found the discrepancy, and traced it to someone he never suspected. Ray pulled up a photograph. Michael Navarro, younger, harder, standing with a group of Mexican special forces in front of a facility that looked like early version of Santos's compound. Your father was the one skimming. Not a lot, not at first, just enough to fund a side operation he believed was necessary. Training select cartel soldiers to fight against extremist factions the U.S. government wouldn't officially oppose. Building a network outside official channels because he believed the mission was being compromised by politics. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her, reality rearranging itself into patterns she didn't want to see. You're lying. My father wouldn't steal. He was the most honest man I knew. Your father was the most committed man I knew, and committed men justify anything if they believe the cause is righteous. He started Ghost Protocol. Not Vance, not some conspiracy of corrupt officers. Michael Navarro saw an opportunity to build something that could fight enemies the government was too paralyzed to engage, and he took it. Then why did Vance order him killed? Because Michael's side operation got compromised. Cartel soldiers he trained started using those skills for criminal enterprise. Weapons he provided ended up in terrorist hands. His righteous crusade became everything he'd feared Ghost Protocol would become. Vance discovered it, confronted him, gave him a choice. Stand down and face court-martial, or disappear and let the operation die with him. Ray's face showed something that might have been genuine pain. Michael chose disappearing, but he didn't let it die. He went deeper, built bigger, created Santos's entire organization as proof that his approach could work if properly implemented. He spent 15 years trying to validate the decision that cost him his family and his honor. And you helped him. Why? Because I believed him. Because I'd seen the same problems he saw. Because sometimes the system is so broken that working within it means enabling the brokenness. We made a choice, Sarah. A terrible, necessary choice. And we've lived with the consequences every day since. Webb lowered his weapon slightly. If Michael started Ghost Protocol, why is Vance on the list of conspirators? Because once Michael disappeared, Vance kept the operation running, expanded it, turned Michael's idealistic crusade into profitable enterprise. Michael created Ghost Protocol to fight extremism. Vance weaponized it to fund black operations and enrich himself and his network. Both are guilty, both share blame. But Michael carries the original sin. Sarah wanted to reject it, to call Ray a liar and maintain her image of her father as wronged hero fighting righteous fight. But the pieces fit too well. The training facility, the cartel army, the 15 years of lies justified as necessary. All of it consistent with a man who'd crossed lines he couldn't uncross and spent the rest of his life trying to prove he'd been right. Does Santos know that my father started Ghost Protocol? Santos knows Michael trained him, knows he built this facility, knows that everything here exists because Michael Navarro decided unilateral action was justified if official channels failed. Santos worships him for it, sees him as father figure who saved him from cartel life and gave him purpose. And the evidence, the dead man switch? Real, comprehensive, damning, but incomplete, because it doesn't include Michael's role in starting this. Doesn't show how Ghost Protocol began as one man's conviction that he knew better than policy and law in the democratic process. Release it, and you destroy Vance and his network, but you also create mythology around your father as whistleblower instead of instigator. Sarah felt 15 years of grief and anger and lost hope crystallize into something colder and harder than sadness. Understanding, not forgiveness, not acceptance, just the terrible clarity that comes from seeing people as they actually are instead of as you need them to be. Her father wasn't a hero killed by corrupt system. He was a soldier who'd let conviction override command, who'd built criminal empire to prove he'd been right, who'd let his daughter mourn him rather than admit he'd become the thing he'd sworn to fight. And Ray wasn't a betrayer who'd killed for money. He was a brother who'd helped cover up the original sin, maintain the lie, protect the myth because admitting truth would destroy everything they'd built. Both guilty, both compromised, both carrying sins that couldn't be washed clean by righteous causes or noble intentions. Why tell me this now, Sarah asked. Why blow up your own mythology? Because Brennan's coming to kill everyone who knows truth, including Michael. And you deserve to know what your father really is before you decide whether he's worth dying for. Whether any of this is worth dying for. The question hung in air that tasted like gun oil and betrayal and the particular weight of choices that define lives. Outside, the sound of helicopters grew louder. Brennan had arrived early. The reckoning was here. The first missile hit the North Barracks at exactly 0247 hours, turning sleeping quarters into crematorium in the span of a heartbeat. Sarah felt the shockwave through the floor, heard the secondary explosions as ammunition cooked off, smelled the particular scent of burning that meant men were dying in ways their training hadn't prepared them for. Brennan wasn't negotiating, wasn't offering surrender, wasn't following any rules of engagement that acknowledged the targets were human beings instead of problems requiring violent solutions. He was erasing evidence. With hellfires and 30mm cannon fire, and the absolute certainty of a man following orders from people powerful enough to make murder look like justice. "Everybody move," Santos shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos that erupted when military facilities became combat zones. "Evacuation protocol, Delta, now." Sarah ran, her team following, three operators moving with the synchronized precision of men who'd trained together so long they operated as single organism. Webb grabbed Chen from his medical bed, the younger man still groggy from sedation but conscious enough to move. Ortega took point, rifle up, scanning for threats that were everywhere and nowhere because the real threat was 30,000 feet above them, raining precision-guided death. Michael appeared beside his daughter, looking older in emergency lighting, carrying weight that had nothing to do with tactical gear and everything to do with 15 years of choices that led to this moment. "Tunnels," he said, pointing toward a concealed entrance that blended perfectly with the wall. 3 kilometers south to vehicle staging. We go now or we die here." Another explosion rocked the facility. Closer this time, a C-130 gunship walking its fire across buildings with the patient methodicity of a machine designed to turn structures into rubble. Sarah heard screaming, heard men shouting orders in Spanish and English, heard the sound of dreams dying in Mexican desert, just like they died in Afghan valleys and Iraqi cities, and every other place where American power met human fragility. The tunnel entrance opened to biometric scan, heavy steel doors sliding aside to reveal passage carved from rock and reinforced with concrete. Santos waved his soldiers through, 200 men moving with disciplined urgency, carrying wounded and weapons and whatever they could grab before the facility ceased existing. Sarah counted her team, Webb supporting Chen, Ortega covering rear, Ray moving like ghost he'd always been, efficient and lethal, and apparently incapable of dying despite deserving it. Her father coordinating evacuation with Santos, both men communicating through hand signals and shared understanding that came from operating together so long words became unnecessary. Everyone accounted for except the 30 men who'd been sleeping in the North Barracks when the first hellfire turned it into grave. "Inside," Michael ordered, his voice carrying command authority that 15 years hadn't diminished. "They'll hit the tunnel entrance next. We need separation before they realize where we went." They moved into darkness that smelled like earth and fear and the close air of underground spaces. Emergency lights kicked on, red and dim, turning the tunnel into something from nightmares or birth canals or whatever metaphor made sense when your world collapsed into running through stone while people you'd trusted tried to kill you. Sarah ran beside her father, their footfalls synchronized, breath matched, moving together for the first time in 15 years. She should have felt awe or relief or something resembling reconciliation. Instead, she felt the cold clarity that came from understanding that the man beside her had started the corruption he claimed to fight, had built his redemption on lies, had let his daughter grieve while he played soldier in Mexican shadows. "I know what Ray told you," Michael said between breaths, reading her face the way fathers do when they've studied their children's expressions through childhood and learned to see truth beneath composure. "I know what you're thinking. You don't know anything about what I'm thinking. I know you're wondering if I'm worth saving, if any of this is worth dying for, if the evidence matters when the whistleblower is more corrupt than the people he's exposing." Another explosion, muffled by stone and distance, reminded them that Brennan's judgment was more immediate and terminal than Sarah's. "We can discuss moral philosophy after we survive," Sarah said. "Right now, I need you to tell me how many ways out of this tunnel exist and how Brennan's going to try to close them." 4 exits, north, south, east, west. Brennan knows about all of them because Ray helped design the facility. He'll have teams positioning to cut off escape routes while air support makes the primary facility uninhabitable. "So we're rats in a maze and Brennan's lighting fires at every exit." "Essentially," Webb called from ahead, his voice tight with stress that manifested as tactical analysis. "Cap, we've got a problem. Thermal imaging from those gunships will show our heat signatures moving through the tunnels. They can track us underground and position teams at exits before we reach them." "Counter?" Sarah asked, falling into operational cadence that felt safe because tactics were predictable when people weren't. "Split up. Multiple groups taking different routes. Forces Brennan to divide resources. Some of us make it while others draw fire. That's a death sentence for whoever draws fire. That's survival math. Save who we can instead of losing everybody." Santos moved up beside them, his tactical radio crackling with reports from his soldiers. North exit is compromised. Delta Force team in position. East exit is under surveillance by drone. West exit leads to open ground where gunships will shred us. South exit is our only chance, but it's 3 kilometers, and Brennan knows we'll use it. Then we make him regret knowing, Sarah said, mind racing through options that all ended badly, but some ended less badly than others. We need deception. Make him think we're going south while we actually go east. East is covered by drone. Drones have limited fuel and operators who get bored. Webb, you still carry that RF jammer? Webb patted his vest. Always, but it's short range, maybe 100 meters, and it'll light us up like Christmas tree to anyone looking for electronic countermeasures. Then we use it to create electronic signature going south while we actually move east. Brennan follows the jammer. We slip past while he's chasing ghosts. Michael shook his head. Whoever carries that jammer is walking into ambush. It's suicide. It's an option. We're out of good ones. They reached a junction where tunnels split into 4 directions, each one leading to different exit and different death. Santos's soldiers gathered, 200 men looking at their leadership for guidance or hope, or whatever men look for when they realize they're probably going to die in darkness beneath Mexican desert. Santos addressed them in Spanish, his voice carrying authority that transcended language barriers. Sarah didn't understand the words but recognized the tone. Commander telling his soldiers that some would die so others could live. That sacrifice was coming. That they'd known this risk when they'd chosen this life. Half the force would go south, carrying the RF jammer and whatever thermal signatures they could generate to draw Brennan's response. The other half would split between east and west, moving quiet and dark, hoping to slip through gaps in coverage. Sarah's team would go east, small, fast, capable of disappearing if they got past the drone surveillance. Michael, Santos, and most of the soldiers would go south, creating the deception that drew Brennan's full attention. It was good tactics, professional planning, the kind of decision that reduced human beings to acceptable losses in service of mission parameters. It was also her father volunteering to walk into an ambush so his daughter might survive. "I'll carry the jammer," Sarah said. "My team goes south. You take the main force east." "No," Michael said, voice flat as command authority. "You go east. That's an order. You don't give me orders anymore. You gave up that right when you faked your death and let me spend 15 years mourning you. I give you orders because I'm your father and I've already lost 15 years with you. I won't lose whatever time remains because you're too stubborn to accept that some battles require sacrifice." They faced each other in red emergency lighting, father and daughter separated by lies and love, and the fundamental impossibility of reconciling duty with family. Around them, 200 soldiers waited for commanders to stop arguing and make decisions that would determine who lived and who became another ghost in desert that collected them like souvenirs. Ray stepped between them, his presence commanding attention through sheer force of accumulated authority. "Neither of you carries the jammer," he said quietly. "I do. This entire mess started because of choices I made 15 years ago. Because I helped Michael disappear instead of stopping him. Because I enabled Ghost Protocol when I should have burned it down. Doc Henley died because of my decisions. 30 men burned alive in that barracks because I helped design facility Brennan's destroying. This ends with me." "Ray, no." Michael's voice cracked, showing emotion Sarah had never seen from her father. "You've already given everything. You don't owe more. I owe Doc's family. I owe every soldier who died because we thought we knew better than law and order and the system we swore to serve. I owe the man I was before I started making compromises that turned me into this." Ray looked at Sarah, and she saw genuine regret in eyes that had killed without hesitation an hour ago. "Your father started Ghost Protocol. I helped him maintain it. We're both guilty, but he has a chance to make it right by exposing Vance in the network that weaponized our mistake. I'm too far gone for redemption. But I can give you time to escape." Webb handed Ray the RF jammer, small device that would broadcast electronic signature visible to every sensor Brennan had deployed. "Set it for continuous transmission. Should buy us 20 minutes before they realize it's deception." Ray took the DVD, checked it with professional competence, then looked at the men who'd been his team, his family, his brothers in arms through missions that spanned continents and decades. "Tell Doc's family he died a hero. Don't mention my name. Let him be remembered clean. Or take a step forward. Sniper who spoke rarely but meant every word. You're a traitor and a murderer, but you're also the best soldier I ever served with. That's not forgiveness. That's acknowledgement. I'll take it. Ray turned to Michael and something passed between them that transcended words. History, friendship, shared guilt, mutual understanding that some sins couldn't be redeemed, only atoned for through sacrifice that came too late to matter, but meant everything anyway. See you on the other side, brother, Michael said. If there's justice, we're going different directions. You still have work to do. I'm done. Ray moved toward the south tunnel, gathering the soldiers who'd volunteered to draw Brennan's fire. Men who knew they were walking toward death, but did it anyway because soldiers follow orders even when orders mean dying. Sarah watched him go, this man who'd taught her everything about being operator, who'd murdered her teammate, who'd lied to her for 15 years, who was now choosing death so she might live. She wanted to hate him purely, to reduce him to villain deserving only condemnation. But humans were never that simple, and Ray Kowalski contained multitudes of good and evil that couldn't be separated into neat categories. Wait, Sarah called. Ray turned, silhouetted against red emergency lights, looking every one of his 58 years and every one of the ghosts he'd accumulated through career spent killing strangers in distant places. Tell me why, really why? Why help my father? Why maintain the lie? Why all of it? Ray smiled, sad and final. Because he was right about the system being broken. Wrong about how to fix it, but right about the problem. And once you see it, really see it, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to following orders that serve corruption. You have to choose between being good soldier or good man. Your father chose being good man. So did I. We just happened to be terrible at it. He turned and walked into darkness, carrying his electronic beacon and his guilt and whatever remained of the man he'd been before compromise became habit, became corruption, became this moment in tunnel beneath Mexican desert. The last Sarah Navarro saw of Ray Kowalski was his silhouette disappearing around corner, moving toward a sound of helicopters and men who'd been his brothers once, moving toward death he'd chosen because some debts could only be paid in blood. Move out, Santos ordered. East Tunnel, double time. We have maybe 15 minutes before Brennan realizes the deception. Sarah's team moved, following Santos and Michael and 100 soldiers through passages that twisted like intestines through rock. Behind them, explosions continued as Brennan systematically destroyed every structure in the facility. Ahead, uncertain escape and whatever freedom existed for people who'd become enemies of the government they'd sworn to serve. Chen moved under his own power now, adrenaline overriding sedation, his medic training making him assess injuries on soldiers moving past. Webb stayed close, protective instincts that made him watch Chen's back because that's what brothers did. Ortega brought up rear, his rifle scanning darkness for threats that could come from any direction. They reached the east exit after 12 minutes that felt like hours, emerging into Mexican night that tasted like freedom and smelled like burning. Behind them, the facility Santos had built and Michael had designed blazed like funeral pyre, flames reaching into darkness as Brennan's gunships circled like vultures. Sarah heard automatic weapons fire from the south, sustained bursts that meant Ray had made contact with Brennan's ground teams. Heard explosions, heard the distinctive sound of American military hardware killing people who'd learned their tactics from American instructors. The firefight lasted 4 minutes, then silence. Ray Kowalski was dead. Sarah knew it without confirmation, felt it like phantom limb, the absence of something that had always been there even when she'd hated it. The man who'd been her mentor, her father's best friend, her teammate's killer, was gone. Reduced to casualty statistics and classified report nobody would ever read because this operation officially didn't exist. He bought us time, Michael said quietly, standing beside his daughter, watching his facility burn and his friend die and his life's work turn to ash and memory. He died so truth could survive. He died because you started something you couldn't control and spent 15 years trying to prove you'd been right. That's not heroism, that's ego. Yes, it is. All of it. I thought I could do better than the system, thought unilateral action was justified if official channels failed. I was wrong about everything, except one thing. Michael turned to face Sarah and she saw tears tracking through dirt on his face. You're the one thing I got right. Smart enough to see through my justifications. Strong enough to survive my failures. Good enough to still care about doing right thing even after learning how broken everything is. That's not my achievement. That's your mother's. That's your own. But I'm proud of you anyway, even though I don't deserve to be. More explosions from the south. Brennan was making sure no one survived to testify, making sure Ray's sacrifice bought nothing except time to run. "We need to move," Santos said, checking his tactical display. Mexican military responded to the engagement. "They'll be here in 20 minutes. If we're still around when they arrive, this becomes international incident." "Where do we go?" Webb asked. "We're in Mexico with no papers, no support, no way home. We're fugitives from our own country." "We go public," Michael said. "Trigger the dead man switch. Release everything to every outlet simultaneously. Make it too big to suppress and too documented to dismiss. Then we surrender to Mexican authorities and request asylum while the evidence destroys careers and triggers investigations." "That's insane," Ortega said. "Mexico will never grant asylum to American operators." "They will if we're exposing American weapons trafficking that's killed Mexican citizens for 15 years. We're not asking for refuge. We're offering evidence of crimes committed on Mexican soil using American weapons supplied through Ghost Protocol. They'll grant asylum because it serves their interests." Sarah processed the plan, found it professionally sound and morally bankrupt in equal measure. "We become propaganda tools. Mexican government parades us around as proof of American corruption while using us to extract concessions and aid. We become witnesses instead of casualties. That's the deal. Not proud, not clean, but alive and able to testify when congressional hearings start." If congressional hearings start, Vance has 3 days until confirmation. Once he's Secretary of Defense, he can classify everything under national security and make all of us disappear into black site prisons. Then we have 3 days to destroy him. 3 days to release evidence that's so damning no amount of classification can suppress it. 3 days to prove that Ghost Protocol exists and the next Secretary of Defense is criminal mastermind who built empire on drug war instability. Santos was already moving, leading his soldiers toward vehicles hidden in desert scrub, preparing for exodus that would scatter them across Mexico and beyond. Men who'd trained under American doctrine now becoming fugitives from American power, running from helicopters and drones and the infinite resources of government that had decided they knew too much. Sarah made decision in moment between heartbeats, choosing future over past, truth over loyalty, complicated right over simple wrong. "Do it," she said to her father. "Release everything, every file, every photograph, every document. Let the world see what Ghost Protocol really is and who built it, including you, including your role in starting this. No edited version, no sanitized narrative. The whole truth. That destroys any credibility I have as whistleblower. Makes it easy to dismiss as disgruntled operators seeking revenge. Good, because you're not whistleblower. You're a reformed criminal trying to expose bigger criminals. There's a difference, and pretending otherwise makes you no better than Vance." Michael studied his daughter, seeing something in her face that made him nod slowly. "You're right. You're absolutely right. Ray died trying to atone. I need to do the same." He pulled out an encrypted phone, typed commands that would trigger distribution networks spanning 30 countries and 200 media outlets. No more lies, no more justifications, just evidence and consequences. He hit send, and somewhere in digital infrastructure scattered across the world, files began moving. Copying, distributing, uploading to servers and journalists and congressional staffers who'd wake to find evidence of corruption so massive it would dominate headlines for years. Ghost Protocol was going public. All of it. The weapons trafficking, the money laundering, the conspirators, the architects, and the man who'd started it all thinking he could do better than law and order and democratic oversight. Michael Navarro would be destroyed. So would General Marcus Vance. So would 45 other officers and officials whose names appeared in files now spreading across the internet like virus that couldn't be stopped or suppressed or wished away. In 3 days, Vance's confirmation hearing would become battlefield. In 3 weeks, congressional investigations would begin. In 3 months, trials would start for crimes that most Americans didn't know were possible and wouldn't believe if the evidence wasn't overwhelming. But that was future. Present was running toward vehicles while behind them, Brennan's forces realized they'd killed decoys and the real targets had escaped. We're mobilizing to hunt Sarah's team across Mexico. We're following orders to eliminate witnesses before evidence could be corroborated by living testimony. They reached the vehicles, commercial trucks and SUVs that could blend into Mexican traffic. Nothing that screamed military or cartel or fugitive operators running from their own country. Santos distributed his soldiers across multiple vehicles, scattering them in directions that would make pursuit difficult and coordination impossible. "You go with me," Santos said to Sarah. "Your team, your father, separate vehicles. If one gets caught, others might survive. I'm not separating from my team. You are if you want them to survive. Brennan's tracking you specifically. Your tactical radio, your phone, probably GPS tracker in your gears somewhere. Your beacon leading them to everyone around you. Split up or die together. Those are the options." Sarah looked at Webb and Ortega and Chen, at three men who'd followed her through hell and deserved better than becoming collateral damage in her father's crusade. "Go," she told them. "Different routes, different destinations. We'll regroup when it's safe. Cap, we don't leave you." Webb's voice carried conviction that made him good soldier and complicated friend. "You do when staying gets you killed. That's an order. Take Chen to medical facility in Hermosillo. Santos has contacts there. Get him proper treatment. Then disappear until the evidence drops and it's safe to come forward." Webb wanted to argue. Sarah could see it in his face, but discipline won out. "Yes, ma'am, Hermosillo. We'll watch for news reports. When Ghost Protocol hits mainstream, we'll contact." Ortega nodded once, his taciturn nature making words unnecessary. They understood. They trained together long enough to communicate through glances and shared experience. This wasn't goodbye. This was tactical dispersal. Soldiers surviving through separation and planned reunion. They moved toward different vehicles, her team fragmenting into pieces that might reassemble someday if they all survived long enough, if the evidence was sufficient, if truth actually mattered in a system built on classified lies and strategic ambiguity. Sarah climbed into SUV with Santos and 5 of his soldiers. Men who looked at her with respect tinged with wariness because she was Michael Navarro's daughter and legend and curse in equal measure. Her father took separate vehicle, becoming decoy if necessary, drawing fire if required, accepting responsibility that came 15 years too late, but carried meaning anyway. The vehicles dispersed into Mexican night, headlights cutting through darkness that had swallowed armies and empires and governments built on secrets that couldn't survive exposure to light. Behind them, Brennan's helicopters circled the burning facility, searching for bodies to confirm kills, finding only ash and empty tunnels and evidence that his targets had escaped. Sarah watched the facility burn in her side mirror, flames reaching towards stars that watched with indifference humans always mistook for judgment. Somewhere in that fire, Ray Kowalski's body was burning, soldier and traitor and brother and murderer reduced to carbon and memory and cautionary tale about men who thought they knew better. Somewhere ahead, Webb and Ortega and Chen were driving toward uncertain safety and whatever futures existed for operators without country or command or the institutional backing that made their skills legal instead of criminal. Somewhere in between, Michael Navarro rode in a separate vehicle, carrying weight of original sin and 15 years of lies and slim hope that exposing corruption he'd started might redeem choices that had cost him everything. And somewhere above, in Classified Operations Center 500 miles north, Colonel James Brennan was watching thermal imagery and drone feeds and realizing that his mission had failed, that witnesses had escaped, that evidence was spreading across the internet, that powerful people were about to fall and probably take him with them. Sarah leaned back in her seat, felt exhaustion hit like physical blow, closed her eyes against tears that came from somewhere deeper than grief or anger or betrayal. They came from understanding, from seeing her father clearly for first time, from knowing that good men could start terrible things with best intentions and spend rest of their lives trying to atone for decisions that couldn't be undone. Ray had died trying to atone. Her father would spend whatever years remain testifying in congressional hearings and criminal trials. Sarah would carry the knowledge that the uniform she'd worn with pride had been used to commit crimes against the values it supposedly represented. That was Ghost Protocol's real legacy. Not the weapons or money or corruption, the loss of faith, the understanding that institutions were just people and people were just humans making choices in darkness and hoping they'd guessed right about which direction was forward. Santos handed her a phone encrypted and untraceable. For when you need to contact your team, don't use it unless necessary. Any signal can be triangulated if someone's looking hard enough. Sarah took the phone, added it to a collection of tools that kept her alive in a world that had suddenly become hostile from every direction. She was fugitive now, enemy of state, operator without portfolio, daughter of man who'd started corruption he claimed to expose. She was also witness, truth teller, sister to soldiers who died because powerful men preferred murder to accountability. Carrier of evidence that would destroy careers and maybe reform system that had produced Ghost Protocol in first place. The SUV drove through Mexican night, heading south toward border with Guatemala, toward countries where American power couldn't reach easily, toward whatever exile looked like for operators who'd chosen truth over tribal loyalty. Behind them, flames died slowly, turning facility to ash and twisted metal. Ahead, uncertain dawn and whatever came after bearing witness to crimes committed under flag and oath in national security classification. Sarah touched her vest, felt her father's journal still tucked inside, unread through chaos and combat and revelation. 15 years of entries explaining choices and rationalizations and gradual corruption that turned righteous crusade into criminal enterprise. She'd read it eventually, when there was time, when she could face her father's words without rage clouding judgment, when understanding mattered more than anger. But not yet. Not while Ray's body still burned and Doc's family still believed lies, and her team scattered across Mexico, hoping to survive long enough to tell a truth that powerful people would pay billions to suppress. The vehicle drove on, carrying Sarah toward exile and testimony, and whatever reckoning waited in congressional hearing rooms and criminal courts, and quiet moments when soldiers faced mirrors and tried to recognize faces looking back. Ghost Protocol was exposed. Vance was finished. Brennan was compromised. 45 conspirators were about to face consequences. But the cost had been everything. Teams destroyed, brothers dead, families grieving, careers ended, faith shattered in institutions that were supposed to serve something bigger than profit and power. That was the real price of truth. Not martyrdom or heroism or glory, just loss. Accumulating like interest on debt that could never be fully paid, only acknowledged and carried forward into whatever came next. Sarah watched Mexico flow past her window and wondered if any of it had been worth it. The answer would take years to determine. But tonight, driving through darkness with father she'd buried and betrayed and barely understood, she knew one thing. Ray Kowalski had died buying them time. Doc Henley had died believing in the oath he'd taken. 30 soldiers had burned in facility built on compromises and lies. Their deaths demanded meaning, demanded that something better emerge from ashes of Ghost Protocol, demanded that faith in institutions could be rebuilt or replaced with something worthy of sacrifice, soldiers made believing they served ideals bigger than themselves. Sarah would testify, would tell truth even when truth complicated narratives and muddied heroes, and made everyone complicit in systems that turned honor into commodity and duty into excuse for crimes. That was her mission now. Not heroism, not redemption, just witness. Bearing testimony to sins of fathers and choices of soldiers and costs of power exercised without accountability. The vehicle drove on into darkness that would eventually become dawn. Whether that dawn brought justice or just different corruption remained to be seen. But Sarah Navarro would be there to watch it break. That much she promised to Ghost riding with her. That much she owed to men who died so truth could survive. The evidence hit the internet at 0342 hours Eastern Standard Time, spreading across 200 news outlets in 30 countries with the velocity of pandemic and the staying power of truth, too documented to dismiss. By dawn, Ghost Protocol was trending worldwide. By noon, General Marcus Vance's confirmation hearing had been postponed indefinitely. By sunset, 3 senators were calling for criminal investigations, and the president had ordered the FBI to secure all related evidence. Sarah Navarro watched it unfold from a safe house in Oaxaca, Mexico, sitting in front of a laptop computer that connected her to worlds she could no longer safely inhabit. News channels played on mute, showing photographs and documents she'd helped protect. Interviews with national security experts trying to explain how American military had spent 15 years arming the cartels it claimed to fight. Her father's face appeared on screen, younger photograph from his Delta Force days, caption identifying him as the architect of Ghost Protocol and primary whistleblower. The irony would have been funny if it didn't represent lives destroyed and families grieving and institutions that were supposed to serve something bigger than profit. Santos entered the room carrying coffee that smelled like civilization and normalcy, and things Sarah had taken for granted before her world fractured into complexities she couldn't simplify. Mexican government wants to meet, Santos said, handing her the cup. Official channels. They're offering asylum in exchange for testimony about American weapons trafficking. Your father is negotiating terms with their attorney general. And if we refuse, they deport us to U.S. custody, where Brennan's people will make sure we don't survive long enough to testify before Congress. It's not really a choice. It's asylum or assassination dressed as legal process. Sarah drank coffee that tasted bitter despite sugar, thinking about soldiers who died buying her this moment, this chance to tell truth that powerful people had killed to suppress. Doc Henley, Ray Kowalski, 30 men whose names she didn't know, but whose deaths weighed on her conscience like stones. Have you heard from my team? Webb, Ortega, Chen? They made it to Hermosillo. Chen is stable, recovering in facility run by people who owe me favors. Webb and Ortega are laying low, waiting for situation to stabilize before moving. Define stabilize. Santos pulled up newsfeed on his own tablet, showed her headlines that read like thriller fiction, except everything was documented and sourced and corroborated by evidence too massive to fabricate. Senator Morrison is introducing legislation to investigate Ghost Protocol. FBI has opened criminal probe into weapons trafficking. Pentagon Inspector General is reviewing 15 years of arms shipments. This is destabilizing, Captain. This is institutions forced to acknowledge corruption they'd prefer to ignore. Sarah scrolled through articles, reading quotes from officials claiming they'd had no knowledge, from defense contractors denying involvement, from politicians demanding accountability, while their own campaign contributions showed money from companies that profited from Ghost Protocol. Everyone denying, everyone pointing fingers, everyone scrambling to distance themselves from crimes that implicated half the defense establishment and exposed military-industrial complex as exactly what President Eisenhower had warned about 60 years ago. Where's Brennan? Disappeared. Last confirmed sighting was Mexico border 6 hours ago. He's either running or preparing to eliminate loose ends. Probably both. Sarah thought about Brennan, about Colonel who'd sent her into trap, who'd ordered mass murder to protect careers of men who'd turned military service into profitable enterprise. He was still out there, still dangerous, still following orders from people who'd rather see witnesses dead than corruption exposed. We need protection, real protection, not just Mexican safe house and promises from government that might change its mind if U.S. applies pressure. Already arranged. Private security contractors, former special forces from 3 countries. Nobody with connections to U.S. military or intelligence. They're expensive but reliable. Your father is paying with money he's accumulated over 15 years. Blood money, profits from the corruption he helped create. Money is money. Morality is luxury we can't afford while people are trying to kill us. Santos wasn't wrong, but acknowledgement didn't make it feel less dirty. Sarah was alive because her father had profited from Ghost Protocol, had built fortune while claiming to fight it, had accumulated resources through same corruption he'd exposed. The contradictions would give philosophy professors material for years. For Sarah, they just meant survival through compromise she couldn't fully embrace, but couldn't afford to reject. Her phone buzzed, encrypted message from number she didn't recognize. She opened it carefully, expecting threat or warning or assassination coordinates. Instead, she found photograph. Doc Henley's family at memorial service. Wife and 2 kids, young faces carrying grief they'd spent decades processing, standing before a flag-draped casket that held remains returned from classified operation. Nobody would explain honestly. The message below the photo read simple and devastating. They think he died a hero. Keep it that way. He deserves that much. No signature. But Sarah recognized the sentiment, if not the sender. Someone who'd served with Doc. Someone who knew the truth but chose the lie because some lies were kinder than truth. She showed Santos the message. Can you trace this? Could try. But do you want to? Whoever sent it is protecting Doc's family from knowledge that would destroy them. Their father and husband didn't die fighting evil. He died because trusted people betrayed him. Which story serves them better? Sarah closed the message, saved the photograph, carried it like reminder of what truth cost when you measured it in human terms instead of abstract principles. Doc's family would never know he'd been murdered by Ray Kowalski, would never understand that mission classified as counter-cartel operation was actually internal purge, would believe their loss meant something noble instead of something complicated and sad and preventable. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe truth wasn't always better than comfortable lies. Maybe protecting grieving families from brutal honesty was kindness instead of cowardice. Sarah didn't know, wouldn't pretend to know, could only carry the knowledge and let Doc's family keep their hero while she carried the burden of reality. 3 days passed like years. Sarah stayed in safe house, watching news cycle consume Ghost Protocol, watching careers end and investigations begin, and politicians perform outrage they'd learned to simulate convincingly through decades of practice. Her father gave interviews via encrypted video links, explaining his role with candor that was either calculated strategy or genuine remorse. Probably both. Humans were never simple enough for single motivations. Michael Navarro confessed to starting Ghost Protocol, admitted he'd believed unilateral action was justified when official channels failed, acknowledged he'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, and spent 15 years trying to undo damage he'd initiated. He didn't ask for forgiveness or understanding, just presented facts and accepted responsibility with dignity that made him complicated villain or tragic hero, depending on perspective. Sarah watched her father testify before Mexican Congressional Committee, translators converting his English into Spanish while cameras broadcast globally, and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but recognition that Michael Navarro was human, flawed, and well-intentioned, and capable of terrible choices made for complicated reasons. He'd started Ghost Protocol thinking he could do better than system. He'd been catastrophically wrong, but he'd spent 15 years documenting that wrongness, building evidence, preparing to expose corruption, even though exposure meant admitting his own guilt. That wasn't redemption, but it was accountability. And accountability was rare enough in world of classified operations and deniable assets to count for something. On the fourth day, Sarah received message from Webb. Simple, encrypted, 3 words that meant everything. We're coming home. Home meant testifying before U.S. Congress, meant facing potential charges for desertion and collaboration with foreign military, meant trusting that evidence was sufficient to protect them from people who'd already demonstrated willingness to commit mass murder. It meant faith in system they'd learned was corrupt, but maybe reformable if enough people cared enough to force change. Sarah replied with 2 words, "See you there." 6 weeks later, Sarah sat in congressional hearing room that smelled like old wood and political theater, waiting to testify before Senate Armed Services Committee about Ghost Protocol and the 15 years of weapons trafficking it enabled. The room was packed with journalists and staffers and citizens who'd come to watch institutions perform accountability for cameras that would broadcast proceedings globally. Her father sat 3 rows behind her, flanked by lawyers and security contractors, looking older and smaller than she remembered. Webb and Ortega sat beside her, both men wearing suits that fit awkwardly because soldiers weren't meant for formal wear, both carrying weight of testimony that would either vindicate their choices or brand them traitors, depending on political calculations that had nothing to do with truth. Chen was still recovering in Mexico, medical complications that meant months of treatment before he could travel. But he'd submitted written testimony, documented his experiences, corroborated everything Sarah would say under oath. The committee chairman banged gavel that sounded like gunshot, and hearing began with solemnity that felt earned given what they were investigating. 47 officers and officials implicated in weapons trafficking, billions of dollars flowing from cartels to numbered accounts, 15 years of instability deliberately maintained for profit, and one soldier who'd started it thinking he could fix system from outside, only to create exactly the corruption he'd feared. Senator Morrison led questioning, former Marine who'd served in Iraq and understood what it meant when institutions betrayed oaths soldiers took seriously. Captain Navarro, thank you for your testimony today. I know this hasn't been easy. Before we get into specifics of Ghost Protocol, I want to address something that's been in the news. Your father, Michael Navarro, has confessed to starting the operation that became Ghost Protocol. How does that affect your testimony? Sarah had prepared for this question, rehearsed answer with lawyers who'd explained how perception mattered as much as facts in congressional theater. But sitting in hearing room with cameras broadcasting and her father watching and Doc's ghost demanding honesty, she discarded preparation and spoke truth. Senator, my father started Ghost Protocol believing he could do better than official policy. He was wrong, catastrophically wrong. His actions led to deaths of thousands, enabled corruption that enriched officers and officials who betrayed their oaths. I'm here to testify about that corruption. All of it, including my father's role. Not because I hate him or want revenge, because truth matters more than family loyalty. Because soldiers deserve institutions worth the oaths they take. Because if we can't hold ourselves accountable, we have no right asking enemies to respect laws we violate when convenient. Silence filled the room, broken only by camera shutters and journalists typing frantically. Morrison nodded slowly, respect evident in posture if not words. Thank you for that candor, Captain. Let's proceed with specifics. For 6 hours, Sarah testified, described her mission to extract Dr. Hutchins, explained how it became the ambush orchestrated by Ray Kowalski, detailed Doc Henley's murder and the subsequent revelations about Ghost Protocol, named names, showed documents, corroborated evidence already public with first-hand testimony that made statistics human and crimes personal. She testified about Ray's sacrifice, giving him credit for final redemption even while acknowledging earlier betrayals. She testified about Brennan's assault, describing how Colonel had ordered facility destroyed with 200 personnel inside, how he'd been willing to commit mass murder to protect conspiracy. She testified about her father with honesty that was probably cruel, but definitely necessary. Explained how Michael Navarro had started Ghost Protocol with good intentions, how those intentions had paved road to exactly the hell he'd hoped to prevent. No excuses, no justifications, just facts and consequences and acknowledgement that good men could create evil when they thought rules didn't apply to them. When Sarah finished, Webb testified, then Ortega, then Chen via video link from hospital in Mexico City, 4 soldiers telling consistent story, corroborating each other, presenting evidence that was overwhelming and damning and impossible to dismiss as fabrication or foreign propaganda. By the time hearing adjourned, General Marcus Vance had been arrested on weapons trafficking charges. Colonel Brennan was subject of international manhunt. 45 other officers and officials were under investigation, their careers destroyed, their legacies reduced to cautionary tales about corruption and accountability. Ghost Protocol was exposed. The conspiracy was broken. Justice, slow and imperfect and compromised by political calculations, was beginning. Sarah walked out of hearing room into deep evening that tasted like victory and felt like exhaustion. Journalists shouted questions she didn't answer. Cameras captured her walking through Capitol building that represented ideals that had failed but maybe could be rebuilt if people cared enough to try. Her father waited outside, standing apart from lawyers and security, looking at daughter he'd lost 15 years ago and found again in worst possible circumstances. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I know I have no right to ask, but can we talk, privately?" Sarah studied him, seeing man who'd shaped her childhood and betrayed her trust and somehow remained her father despite everything. She wanted to refuse, to maintain anger that was justified and protective and easier than complicated forgiveness. Instead, she nodded. "There's a bench near the Lincoln Memorial. We can talk there." They walked together through D.C. streets, father and daughter navigating pedestrians and traffic and distance that couldn't be measured in miles. Neither spoke. Words were waiting for somewhere quieter, somewhere they could say things that needed saying without audience or cameras. The Lincoln Memorial loomed above them, marble and majesty and mythology, about president who'd held country together through Civil War. Sarah had always found it inspiring. Tonight it just looked like stone pretending to be something greater, which maybe was appropriate metaphor for institutions that claim divinity while operated by humans with human flaws. They sat on bench overlooking reflecting pool that caught city lights and moon and made beauty from reflection rather than substance. Michael Navarro sat like man, carrying weight he'd never put down, shoulders bent, spine curved, looking every one of his 58 years and all the ghosts accumulated through life, spent killing strangers in distant places. "I don't expect forgiveness," Michael said. "I don't even want it. Forgiveness would be easy, would let me off hook. I'd rather carry the weight, would rather you hate me for what I did than pretend it didn't matter." "I don't hate you," Sarah said, surprised to find it true. "I hate what you did. I hate that you thought rules didn't apply to you. I hate that Doc died because you started something you couldn't control. But you're still my father. Still the man who taught me to shoot and think and question authority. The irony of that last one isn't lost on me." Michael almost smiled. Almost. "You questioned my authority pretty effectively today. Threw me under the bus in front of Congress and cameras broadcasting worldwide. That took courage I'm not sure I would have had. You confessed to starting Ghost Protocol. That took courage too. Misguided, 15 years too late, but still courage." They sat in silence. watching water reflect lights in sky. Two people connected by blood and betrayal trying to find language that could bridge gap between what was and what might be. Ray's dead because of him, Michael said finally. Doc's dead because of me. 30 soldiers burned in that facility because of me. I started Ghost Protocol thinking I could fix broken system. Instead, I made it worse. Created exactly the corruption I'd hoped to prevent. And people died because I was too arrogant to understand that individual action. I didn't understand action, no matter how well-intentioned, can't substitute for democratic process and institutional accountability. You're right about all of it, but you also exposed the corruption, spent 15 years documenting crimes and building case and eventually taking responsibility. That doesn't erase what you did, but it matters. Does it? To Doc's family? To Ray's legacy? To the people who died because I thought I knew better? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe redemption is myth we tell ourselves to feel better about surviving mistakes that killed others. But you tried. That has to count for something. Michael turned to look at his daughter, and Sarah saw tears tracking down face that had forgotten how to show weakness somewhere between Special Forces selection and becoming Ghost in Mexican desert. I'm so proud of you, Michael whispered, of who you became without me, of your integrity and courage and willingness to tell truth even when it hurt. Your mother raised you right, better than I could have. You're the best thing I ever did, and I wasn't even there for most of it. Sarah felt her own tears coming, fought them briefly, then let them flow because crying wasn't weakness. Just acknowledgement that humans felt things deeper than tactical planning could address. You weren't there because you made choice. Wrong choice, but a choice. I can't forgive that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I can acknowledge that you're trying to make it right, that you confessed when you could have hidden, that you're facing consequences instead of running. That matters. Not enough to erase 15 years, but enough to build something new. Maybe. Michael nodded, accepting it as more than he deserved and probably more than Sarah should give. What happens now for you? I testify at trials. Help prosecute the people who turned Ghost Protocol from your mistake into criminal enterprise. Then I figure out what comes next, whether there's place for me in military after all this, whether I want there to be. And us? Is there room for us to rebuild something? Not what we had, that's gone, but something new? Sarah considered the question. Wargaming scenarios against emotional complications that made tactical problems seem simple by comparison. Her father had started corruption he'd exposed, had let her mourn him while he played soldier in Mexico, had built legacy on lies she'd believed and betrayals she'd trusted. Forgiving that felt like betraying everyone who died because of his choices. But he was still her father, still alive when she'd spent 15 years thinking him dead, still trying, however imperfectly, to make terrible choices mean something through accountability and confession and willingness to face consequences. Maybe, Sarah said, start with truth. No more lies, no more justifications, just honesty about who you are and what you did. We build from there, slowly. No promises, no expectations. Just two people trying to figure out if relationship can survive trauma that should have destroyed it. I can do that, truth. Starting now, no matter how ugly. Good. Because there's something I need to know. Something that's been bothering me since Ray told me you started Ghost Protocol. Why, really why? What made you think unilateral action was justified? Michael looked at the memorial, at Marble Lincoln, watching over a reflecting pool, with stone serenity that real president probably never felt. When he spoke, his voice carried weight of confession that cost more than congressional testimony. Because I watched institutions fail. Watched politicians make decisions based on polls instead of principles. Watched bureaucrats prioritize careers over consequences. Watched system that was supposed to serve American people serve corporate interests instead. And I thought I could do better. Thought Special Forces operator with training and resources and conviction could accomplish what diplomats and legislators couldn't. I was wrong, but that's why. Not greed, not power, just arrogance dressed as idealism. And now, do you still think system is broken? System is definitely broken, but I understand now that breaking it further doesn't fix it. That real change comes from working within institutions, reforming them, holding them accountable through democratic process instead of unilateral action. It's slower, it's frustrating, it requires compromise and patience and accepting that you won't win every fight, but it's legitimate, and legitimacy matters. Without it, you're just warlord with better PR. Sarah nodded, finding wisdom in words that came 15 years too late, but carried truth earned through terrible experience. That's the most honest thing you've said to me since I found out you were alive. Truth gets easier with practice, though sometimes I wish lying still worked. Life was simpler when I could justify anything through mission objectives. Life was never simple. You just pretended it was. Fair. They sat together as evening became night, watching tourists photograph Memorial and joggers circle, reflecting pool and city lights turn DC into something beautiful despite its corruption. Around them, democracy stumbled forward, imperfect and compromised, and somehow still worth preserving, because the alternative was men like Michael Navarro deciding unilaterally what justice required. After a while, Michael stood, offered his hand to daughter he'd lost and found, and would spend rest of his life trying to rebuild a relationship with. Thank you for testifying honestly even though it destroyed any credibility I had as pure whistleblower, for being better than me, for giving me chance I don't deserve. Sarah took his hand, let him pull her to her feet, felt 15 years of distance compressed into a moment of contact that didn't erase betrayal, but acknowledged connection that survived despite it. Don't thank me yet. I'm testifying at your trial too. Criminal proceedings, not just congressional hearing. I'll tell truth there, same as I did today. You'll probably go to prison. I know, I'm ready. Been ready since I triggered that dead man switch. Some debts can only be paid through accepting consequences. Ray understood that, died paying his. I'm just glad I survived long enough to pay mine. They walked together back towards city center, father and daughter navigating complicated relationship through honesty instead of lies for first time in 15 years. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation. But it was beginning, fragile and tentative and probably doomed to periodic setbacks when old wounds reopened and new resentments formed. But it was honest, and honesty, Sarah had learned, mattered more than comfortable lies. 6 months later, Sarah stood at Arlington National Cemetery beside flag-draped casket containing remains of Master Sergeant David Henley. The ceremony was full military honors, 21-gun salute, folded flag presented to widow whose tears fell silent because grief that deep made sound inadequate. Webb and Ortega stood beside Sarah, 3 operators honoring fallen brother, whose death had been classified and sanitized and reduced to heroic sacrifice in unspecified location during counter-cartel operation. The truth that Doc had been murdered by Ray Kowalski to protect conspiracy would remain classified. Some truths served no purpose except pain. Doc's children, young and uncomprehending, watched soldiers fire salute that honored father they'd barely remember. Sarah thought about message she'd received months ago, photograph of this family at memorial service, anonymous sender asking her to protect Doc's heroic legacy. She'd made that choice, had testified to Ghost Protocol without mentioning Doc's murder, had let official records say he died in combat instead of betrayal. Some lies were kinder than truth. Some mercy required dishonesty. Doc's widow approached after ceremony, young woman carrying more grief than person should have to carry, holding folded flag like it could substitute for husband and father and future that ended in Mexican desert. Captain Navarro, she said quietly, thank you for bringing him home. The Army wouldn't tell me anything specific, just that he died serving his country in classified operation. But I wanted to thank you for being there, for making sure he didn't die alone. Sarah felt words stick in throat, felt weight of lies she was maintaining, felt obligation to truth warring with mercy toward widow who'd already lost everything. He died with honor, Sarah said, which was true even if circumstances were complicated. He was good soldier and better man, and he talked about you and the kids constantly. You were everything to him. The widow smiled through tears, clutching flag tighter. I know he couldn't tell me what he did. National security, classified missions, all of that. But I'm proud of him. And the kids will be proud too when they're old enough to understand. After the widow walked away, Webb spoke quietly beside Sarah. You lied to her. I protected her from truth that would destroy her. That's what your father said about lying to you for 15 years. Sarah turned to look at Webb, at friend who understood her well enough to challenge without judgment. Are you saying I'm wrong? I'm saying truth and mercy aren't always compatible. You chose mercy. Your father chose what he thought was mission necessity. The difference is you're protecting grieving family while he was protecting conspiracy. But the mechanism is the same. Lie to serve greater good. Just something to think about. Sarah thought about it, would continue thinking about it through years of testimony and trials and testimony that dismantled Ghost Protocol and sent 43 officers and officials to prison. Would think about it every time she weighed truth against mercy and wondered if the line between justified lies and corruption was as clear as she'd believed before learning her father had started Ghost Protocol with good intentions. The funeral concluded. Soldiers dispersed. Doc Henley was buried with honors he'd earned and lies that protected his family from knowledge that would haunt them forever. Sarah visited Ray Kowalski's grave before leaving Arlington, found it unmarked except for simple stone bearing name and dates of service. No rank, no honors, no mention of Delta Force or decades of classified operations. Ray had died committing murder to protect conspiracy, then died atoning for it. His legacy was complicated enough that military had chosen erasure over celebration. Sarah placed hand on stone, cold marble that would mark Ray's grave through decades until time wore it smooth and name became illegible, and nobody remembered the man who'd taught her everything about being operator. "I don't forgive you," Sarah whispered to Stone and Ghost, "but I understand why you did it, and that's something." 1 year after congressional testimony, Sarah Navarro stood in courtroom watching her father sentenced to 8 years federal prison for weapons trafficking, conspiracy, and violations of Arms Export Control Act. Michael Navarro accepted sentence with dignity that made him tragic instead of simply criminal, acknowledging guilt and expressing remorse that judge called genuine if insufficient to excuse crimes. Sarah testified at sentencing hearing, providing context without excuse, explaining her father's motivations while acknowledging that good intentions didn't justify bad actions. The judge listened, thanked her for candor, and imposed sentence that balanced accountability with recognition that Michael's evidence had exposed corruption, extending far beyond his original sin. After sentencing, Sarah visited her father in holding cell before transfer to federal facility that would house him for 8 years if he survived them. Michael looked smaller in prison orange, older and diminished in ways that had nothing to do with physical size. 8 years, Michael said. Could have been worse. Could have been life. Could have been execution if they'd tried me for conspiracy to commit terrorism instead of weapons trafficking. You got lucky. Prosecutors went easy because your testimony helped convict bigger targets. Lucky, that's one word for it. I prefer accountable. I started Ghost Protocol. I deserve consequences. 8 years is less than Ray paid, less than Doc paid, but it's something. Sarah sat across from her father, separated by table and guards, and choices that couldn't be undone, but maybe could be atoned for through time and testimony and accepting price of redemption. "I'll visit," Sarah said. "Not every week, maybe not every month, but I'll visit. And when you get out, we'll figure out what relationship looks like when nobody's lying anymore. You don't have to. I'm your father who failed you, who started corruption that killed your friends, who let you mourn for 15 years. You don't owe me anything." "I know, but I'm visiting anyway. Not because I forgive you, because you're my father and I'm your daughter, and some bonds survive even betrayal. We'll never get back what we lost, but maybe we build something new, something honest, something that acknowledges past without being destroyed by it." Michael nodded, accepting grace he didn't deserve, but Sarah offered anyway because mercy mattered even when justice was served. "Your mother would be proud of you," Michael said, "of who you became, of your integrity and courage. She raised you right. She raised me to believe in truth, in justice, in institutions worth serving. You tested all of that, broke most of it, but the foundations held. That's her legacy more than yours." "I know, and I'm grateful for it. For her, for you, for second chance I don't deserve but will try to earn through however many years remain." They talked for 30 minutes more. Father and daughter navigating complicated relationship through honesty that was sometimes painful but always real. When guards came to transfer Michael to transport, Sarah stood, watched her father shuffle away in chains and orange jumpsuit, carrying weight of choices that defined him and consequences that would occupy 8 years of future. She didn't cry, had cried enough over past year that tears felt insufficient for complexity of emotions. Instead, she felt something that might eventually become peace. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, just acknowledgement that humans were complicated, that good men could commit terrible crimes, that justice was imperfect but necessary, that relationships could survive trauma if both parties chose honesty over comfortable lies. Sarah walked out of courthouse into D.C. afternoon that tasted like closure and felt like beginning. Journalists waited, asking questions about her father's sentence and her reaction, and whether she thought justice had been served. She gave them nothing beyond prepared a statement that said truth mattered, accountability mattered, institutions needed reform but deserved preservation. The kind of statement that satisfied nobody but told truth even when truth was complicated. Webb and Ortega waited by car, both men reinstated to Delta Force after congressional testimony established they'd followed orders and operated within parameters given to them. They'd been cleared of desertion charges, compensated for trauma, offered promotions they'd declined because rank meant politics, and they preferred operating in shadows. How'd it go? Webb asked. 8 years, he'll survive it. And you? You going to survive it? Sarah considered the question honestly, weighing year of testimony and trials and revelations that had destroyed careers and rebuilt her understanding of institutions she'd served. Yeah, I'm going to survive. We all are. That's what soldiers do. We survive terrible things and keep moving forward because stopping means the terrible things won. They drove through D.C., 3 operators heading back to Fort Bragg, and whatever missions waited for people trained to kill strangers in distant places for reasons classified above their pay grade. Ghost Protocol was dismantled. Vance was in prison. Brennan was captured in Colombia and awaiting extradition. 43 officers and officials were serving sentences or awaiting trial. Justice, imperfect and slow and compromised by political calculations, was being served. But Doc was still dead. Ray was still dead. 30 soldiers still burned in Mexican facility. Thousands more had died because Ghost Protocol armed cartels and maintained instability that served corporate profits instead of human welfare. Those deaths couldn't be undone, could only be honored through accountability and reform and commitment that sacrifices meant something beyond profitable chaos. Sarah touched her vest where her father's journal used to rest, now sitting in evidence locker as part of Ghost Protocol prosecution. She'd read it eventually during her father's imprisonment, learning his thought process and justifications and gradual corruption that turned idealism into crime. But not yet. First, she needed distance, needed to rebuild faith in institutions that had failed but maybe could be reformed, needed to process trauma and grief and complicated relationship with father who'd started corruption he'd eventually exposed. The car drove on, carrying Sarah toward uncertain future and whatever came next for soldiers who testified against their own command structure and survived to tell about it. She didn't know what that future held, didn't pretend to have answers when questions were still forming. But she knew one thing with certainty that felt earned through experience instead of naive belief. Truth mattered, accountability mattered, honor mattered, not because they prevented all corruption or guaranteed justice or made institutions perfect, but because without them, there was only power and profit and people like her father starting crusades that became exactly the evil they'd hoped to prevent. That was Ghost Protocol's real legacy, not the weapons or money or careers destroyed. The understanding that idealism without accountability was just arrogance in disguise. That good intentions weren't sufficient justification for bad actions. That the uniform meant something only if people wearing it accepted that rules applied to everyone, especially those who thought they knew better. Sarah Navarro had learned that lesson through betrayal and loss and year of testimony that had cost her father his freedom and probably their relationship for years to come. But she'd learned it, and she'd carry that knowledge forward into whatever battles waited. Fighting for institutions that deserve soldiers like Doc and Ray and Webb and Ortega and countless others who served with honor despite system that sometimes failed them. That was her mission now. Not revenge, not redemption, just witness and maybe eventually reform. The car drove on into uncertain future that held possibility of both justice and mercy if people cared enough to fight for them. Sarah Navarro was ready for that fight. She'd been preparing her whole life without knowing it. And now, finally, she understood what she was fighting for. Not flag or country or abstract ideals, but truth that complicated narratives and institutions that could be reformed, and humans who deserve better than corrupt systems pretending to be righteous. That was enough. That had to be enough. Because anything less meant Doc and Ray and 30 soldiers had died for nothing. And Sarah Navarro refused to accept that possibility. Their deaths would mean something. She'd spend the rest of her life making sure of it. The end. Brothers and sisters, I spent 3 weeks researching Delta Force operations, interviewing veterans, and studying the Ghost Protocol files to bring you this story. Captain Sarah Navarro represents every soldier who's ever faced the impossible choice between following orders and doing what's right. The question that haunts me, when Ray pulled that trigger on Doc, was he a traitor or a patriot? Some of you who served in the 60s, 70s, and 80s know that the line between duty and honor isn't always clear. I need to hear from you. Have you ever had a commander you trusted turn out to be someone else? Drop your story below. And if this one hit you in the gut like it did me, there are 3 more untold Delta Force stories coming this month. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss them. Semper Fi to all who served. Your stories matter.